Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 581. An unexpected visitor. After finishing up, Seth left his workshop. Seeing the two dwarfs still busy, he felt almost a little bad to be the first one to leave. Only almost. He was just thinking of grabbing a bite before returning to his quarters and maybe play some games when he saw a rare face. It was Mike. Well, Mike wasn't hard to meet in general, but it was rare for the beastman to find his way into the workshops. Look who got lost. Mike. What's up? He greeted the brother of his girlfriend. Seth, there you are. We have a guest that would like to meet you. He's waiting in the outer lobby. The outer lobby? Seth halted for a moment, to remember what the outer lobby was. Right, it was the gatehouse where the Oath Guard was currently stationed. They had jokingly called it the outer lobby, never expecting that it would be used for actual guests to wait. Who is it? The blacksmith asked, perplexed. It's an old man calling himself Master Mountain. Seth looked even more shocked. He had a vague idea who that was. They had met an old man during their escape from the theocracy in the forest. It felt like so long ago. Although he had given the man a ring, he never expected him to really come looking for them. I will go meet him. Although he had never expected him, it was a pleasant surprise. After finding out about the voracious Cloud Continent, he and Al made the connection that Master Mountain was probably also a resident of the invading Cloud Continent. Allison's miraculous attribute motion was also based on the knowledge Master Mountains shared with them. And Seth's first legendary weapon could be attributed to him since he gave Seth the meteoric iron. There were more than enough reasons to be grateful to the old man. But most importantly, he was a friendly connection with this invading world. Even with Alzalsar squeezing out all the information from the cultivator, it was better to have some friends on the other side. The blacksmith went to wash up and changed his clothes before going to meet his visitor. Of course, it was not just Seth's gratitude that made him act this way. With more information about the foreign world and their structure of power, it was more than likely that Master Mountains was an immortal or close to being one. There was no need to offend someone like this by being insincere. Outside the room was the mighty Minotaur standing guard at the door, and Seth greeted Asterion in passing. Behind the door was the common space of the Oath Guard. It was a good place with a warm atmosphere. His visitor sat in a comfortable lazy boy sipping a cup of tea someone had already brought him. Hello Master Mountain, we meet again. Let me introduce myself again, I am Seth Smith, the Tower Master of Minas Mar, he greeted with an amicable smile. It has been some time, young friend. Please, just call me you, since I have come with a somewhat shameless request today. Master Mountain, you, seemed quite lax, so Seth simply sat down in the lazy boy beside him. A shameless request? How can I help you? You sighed. An old friend asked a troublesome task of me, I am looking for someone. Seth had a hunch about who he was looking for. The man is an elder of the Northern Edge sect. He came to this land looking for a chance to break through, but they lost contact with him, you explained. This fit with the information Alzalsar had pressed out of their prisoner. Was he really an important person? For Master Mountain, a man of unknown strength, to not just look for him, but also knock on the gates of Minas March. Could this really be a coincidence? He is a lad of considerable strength. If he really were to face a danger, the fight would leave scars on the landscape. Seth couldn't help but see his remark as a subtle hint. Previously he had mentioned the floating peaks, he had deliberately called them peaks, not floating islands. The bard was relatively sure that you either knew or at least suspected that Minas Mar knew something or was directly involved. I might know of such a man, but his current condition might not be to your liking. The blacksmith decided not to hide it for several reasons. First of all, these kinds of mind games where he didn't quite know his opponent were a pain in his ass. Another reason was that he was quite sure to be in the right and didn't judge Master Mountain as someone who wouldn't listen to reason. Thirdly, he was only indirectly involved in this. It was Alzalsar's business. Even if Master Mountain was stronger than the Northern Edge sect's elder, so was the sorceress. He was confident in his ability to shove all the blame on her shoulders. What could have happened to him? You didn't seem too concerned when he asked this, and Seth simply explained what had happened while he was out fighting abominations and necromancers. According to our associate Alzalsar, she found what she called a chi gathering formation, that was responsible for drastic climate changes in the area. With the lives of billions of citizens on the line, she confronted the perpetrator and was victorious. He spun a fantastic tale, painting the lascivious sorceress as a great heroine. I think I get the picture. Is he still alive? She broke his cultivation and I have no idea what else she did to him, but he is definitely still alive, the blacksmith assured. Yu was visibly relieved. He didn't seem to mind that the man he was looking for his old friend, was beaten, crippled, and probably tortured. It's good enough that he is alive. Could you speak to this powerful fairy and ask her if she could hand him over to me? It won't be for free, I promise. Won't there be any repercussion if you return with him? Seth asked a little worried. No need to worry. I don't intend to return him to his sect, so there won't be repercussions. My acquaintance will take care of the Northern Edge sect. Although what he said didn't quite sound hostile, it didn't seem like he and his old friend had any good relations with the Northern Edge sect. There was no reason to refuse him if it was like his. Of course, Seth also thought of the possibility that Yu might be lying to him. The blacksmith judged that the chance for a good relationship was worth the risk of getting on that sect's bad side. They were on their bad side, to begin with. Again, if something went really wrong, he could shove all the blame on Al and the sorceress would have to take care of it. Then I don't see any problem in convincing her to hand him over, Seth concluded. We can visit Al's Alsar together tomorrow. If you don't mind, you can stay the night at Mina's March. Then I will take this offer. Since you already promised to accompany me for a talk with this sorceress, I will share some information with you that might come in handy in the future. Please, do tell. Seth was a little surprised, but he wouldn't say no to free information. Your world is not as detached from the voracious cloud continent anymore, as you might think. Despite having your own developed culture and source of power, you are unprepared for the advanced forces of the Jianghu. Some elements of the Black faction have already grasped part of the underworld of the place you call Y City. They use the natives to distribute a vicious drug among the populace. It took the blacksmith a moment to make the connection. He was not too involved in what was going on in Delta, but Mina had told him about the growing number of incidents that involved a drug popular among players. Could you be talking about the Divine Strength drug? He asked when he remembered the name. Divine Strength? I guess somebody could call it that, based on the early symptoms. However, its real name is the Blood Berserker pellet. It is a malicious medicine. The medicine is highly addicting to the uninitiated and will slowly turn them into a blood berserker. Unless one knows the supplementary cultivation technique, they will just be slowly refined into ingredients for the pellet, the old man spoke with a heavy voice. Becoming ingredients, you can't mean. Seth seemed to vaguely remember having heard of an incident that happened while he was away on his quest. Yes. This medicine is refined from people. Chapter 582. Selling a prisoner. They use the bodies of fully transformed blood berserkers. The stronger the berserker was, the higher is the efficacy of the pellet. It is a highly sought-after cultivation supply among the Black faction. Ew. And people from your world ingest something like that willingly. Seth screeched, twitching in disgust. The incident he remembered was the robbery of bodies from the morgue and some hospitals. The Sickfu *CKs actually stole corpses to make drugs. Some from this do, too, he reminded Seth. Ugh, don't remind me. I'm sure they wouldn't if they knew what that stuff was made of. Can you tell me any more about their activities in Delta? Unfortunately not. They are being quite prudent, using native factions as intermediaries and not personally taking action in anything except the production, so far. I can't help but admire the ingenuity of criminals. I was unable to find anything on the distribution methods. Well, I can't blame you for that. Is there an antidote? Seth asked the probably most important question, but Yu only shook his head. At least there is none in our world, which is why even the unorthodox faction will heavily persecute the perpetrators and users. There might be ways, but I know none of them. I see. Let's keep talking tomorrow, it is already late. Heavy-hearted, Seth decided to share the information with Mary and the others the next day, so they could talk about what steps to take. Hunting criminals was not their job, but if they fancied that adventure, Seth wouldn't stop them. The blacksmith leaned more towards informing the police about what they knew and stopping at that. He led Master Mountain to a guest room in the outer lobby. Even if he wanted to trust the old man, he would not invite him into their tower. According to Alzar, Minas Mar was most likely able to withstand the siege of legendary existences, but not from the inside. He would not invite someone like you into his home when he still wasn't sure whether to fully trust him. It might be too late to not get involved, Mary stated. Seth had called for a meeting of the lords early in the morning before anyone could leave to do their duties and do their own stuff. The blacksmith had just shared the information he had gotten from you, and Mary spoke up after a short silence filled with gagging. Why do you think so? The blacksmith asked, surprised. Things above are getting out of hand lately, Mina expressed hesitatingly. Unlike Link, Allison, or Seth, the members of the field teams were directly involved in the emergency efforts and worked with the refugees. They had a better picture of the situation than the shut-ins and explained. With Seth's information, the picture was completed and their suspicions were confirmed. There were two reasons for the attacks on the guards. Following the attacks on the guards, people used the weakened security to approach the refugees. Sometimes openly, others under a guise, but their actions were the same. They got people to consume the divine strength drug. Some openly sold the drug, others played good Samaritans and distributed food laced with it and similar ruses. The problem was that they became addicted after the first dose. They would quickly develop withdrawal symptoms and there was no known antidote. Even cold detoxification was meaningless. Instead of the effects weakening, they would become stronger with continued withdrawal. As a consequence, the affected would do anything for the next dose. Things like drugging others, or selling their family, and there were simply too few people left to stop this from happening all over the place. The people of Sigma were completely disillusioned with their current circumstances and had a hard time trusting anyone anymore. The second effect was a shift in reputation for Mina's march. They were the only ones without any casualties because of the attacks. Of course, this was owed to their superior equipment and training. However, people were seldom rational when it came to their losses. Was it really just because they wore better items? And really, who would equip their guards in full sets of epic armor? Did anybody verify that? On one hand, there was Mina's Mar not suffering any setbacks no matter how often they were attacked. On the other side, there was someone obviously gaining from the sudden lack of guards. There were not just one or two people who started suspecting them to be involved or even the perpetrators of the attacks. Whether there was an obvious or logical reason for them to do so, didn't matter. They think we are gaining something from voluntary work? So, you are telling me some hidden grey eminence has started this elaborate scheme to distribute drugs and sideline us in the public? Unfortunately, yes. That is my conclusion. Is there anything we can do about that? No. If we try to go against the rumors, I fear people will only feel confirmed in their suspicions. I fear even if we shared the information about the drug, authorities might not take us seriously. The best course of action would probably be to ignore it and keep going, Mary summarized her conclusions. Any better ideas? Seth asked in the round. However, he was greeted with silence. When it came to the court of public opinion, it was always a tricky thing for most people. There were master manipulators out there, but none of them were here. They were usually not the kind of people Seth wanted to associate with. Fine, then here is my idea. They say we gain something from this situation and our opponent probably wants us to suffer in silence. I say, we use this situation and really gain something. The faces around the table looked at him in confusion. How would we do that? Mary summarized all of their thoughts. Someone handed us an anxious crowd of people that have lost everything and are more or less stranded in a foreign place grasping for any crumbs of hope they can get. Coincidentally, I know their one and only trusted leader and he owes me big time. The real question is, how couldn't we gain something from this if we put our minds to it? He proceeded to lay out his idea in detail. After the early meeting with the lords, Seth picked up Master Mountain to visit Alzalsar. They didn't use Minas Mar's teleportation and instead walked around the mountain to reach Delta City entrance by road. On the way, they chatted about this and that. Yu was especially interested in Asterion, as he had never seen an automaton with flesh and blood before. I witnessed many weird and magical things on the voracious crowd continent, but your gatekeeper ranks among some of the most curious things I have seen, he said on the topic. Oh, is he among the top 10? What does that mean? I mean, is he one of the 10 most curious things you have seen, or maybe a little less special? He tried to explain what he meant. Oh, I understand what you mean. If you phrase it like this, top 50. Only top 50. I have seen a lot. Seth was still careful not to reveal too much, but they continued to have a nice chat. He could also deepen his understanding of the Jianghu a little. Apparently, there were many factions, that were once again split into factions. The biggest differentiation was into the Black faction, the unorthodox faction, and the orthodox faction. Each had its own groups of alliances above the level of sects and big families. When he spoke of his homeland, he kept emphasizing how vast it was, at least several times bigger than Earth, and that the districts could barely compete with the number of people in some of the bigger cities of the Central Seven. Although the other only mentioned these things in anecdotes, together with the information he got from Alzalsar, it gave Seth a more complete picture of this other world. What he really managed to ascertain was, that this place was maybe as terrifying as the mutating Earth. My young friend, I am sure you are virile, but I am a little too old to enter these kinds of places. I appreciate the thought, but we should really hurry to meet Fairy Sorceress. At first, Seth had been confused when you called Alzalsar a fairy, as the only fairy he knew was Finn. But he realized that it was his way to call a beautiful, powerful woman. That he insisted on calling her fairy despite knowing that she was several centuries old, said more about you's age, than anything else. We aren't here to buy you a woman, or whatever preference you have. Alzalsar made her base here. The building over there belongs to her. Except for an awkward cough, Master Mountains fell silent until they entered the building and met Alzalsar. Al, do you remember Master Mountain? He came to ransom our prisoner. What followed was a conversation between two high-level existences, Seth did not bother even listen to. In the end, some knowledge and a person changed owners. Are you really returning right away, you? Yes, I have to bring him back as quickly as possible, Master Mountain said. The next moment the elder of the Northern Edge sect was sucked into the small bracelet on Yu's wrist. Seth's eyes shone. Is that a spatial storage item? He asked eagerly. Although he had the system inventory, he couldn't use it on golems that counted as living beings, such as Ceres. He had been thinking of replacing his wyvern ring with such an item, though he would need Alzalsar's help with it. However, if he could get one from Yu, it would be a lot easier. Oh, this? Yes, it is a spatial artifact I have refined over the past 50 years. It is quite rare since it allows to storage a living person. Unfortunately, the size and capacity are not very big. Seth's hopes were dashed, when you readily explained that he could at most fit 2 people in the bracelet and there was an upper limit for their realm. If the elder's cultivation was not broken, it might not have been possible to store him so easily. The blacksmith could only accept that the cultivation realm wouldn't throw an easy solution at him for free. They didn't talk for long before you really left. It seemed like it was true that he was in a hurry after acquiring the hostage. Though he promised to return with a reward for Seth, once his business was settled. Chapter 583. Oath Jewelry. Once the old man was out the door, Seth turned toward the sorceress. Al, can you help me make a spatial equipment to store my golems in? He asked since he was already here. It was a pain to walk all the way, every time he wanted to speak with her. The sorceress vehemently refused to use a mobile phone and her building was shielded from the magic signals of communication crystals. I don't have time for that now. Did you forget about the whole business of setting up a defense system for Delta and your method of making Ithildan? Yeah, I'm only supervising one of those crazy projects for you on the side. That means you will help me do it once that is finished? Great. I have stuff to do, too. I can wait, he immediately forced the promise on the sorceress. He knew for a fact that the slippery lich would immediately try to back out of this deal if he didn't fix it right away. It was almost tragic, how hard it was to get something for free from Alzalsar, now that she had an independent body. Nothing is so hard, as a lich's ingratitude, Seth lamented to himself. A thought Alzalsar would smite him for if she could read his thoughts. You know, maybe if you stay the night, I might think about doing it now, the sorceress said provocatively, licking her lips. She knew exactly how to get rid of him when she was annoyed. No. It's okay. I can wait. Bye. He was suddenly in a hurry to leave. Although he was sure Mina would understand, his hips might give out as he had to spend a night with an incensed Alzalsar. He hurried back to Mina's march. Before he returned to his workshop, Seth thought of visiting Karina. He had been a little busy with his own stuff and had not looked after her for a while. After their excursion along the to-be trade route, the situation of the hanging tree in the cellar of Mina's Mar had calmed down. With over 10 auxiliary trees it had an energy sink for all the overflowing mana it absorbed from the surrounding mountains. Since the branch trees outside could grow as much as they wanted, there were no more problems and the root egg had receded. When he entered the cavern past the herb gardens, they look almost normal again, like the day when he revived the tree. They had decorated the branches of the massive tree with dozens of magic lanterns that illuminated the place. Besides, the thick trunk was now a small square with bench made of giant roots, peeking out from the ground. Here, the blacksmith found the dryad teaching a group of children. They were not just Pip and her friends, but there were also Ruby, Tekker's daughter, and some of the Tijat children present. It felt a little like a daycare. She was teaching them nature magic using the games she called the Seven Saras, as she used to in the past. Seth had no intention to disturb their lesson and sneaked back out. He was glad Karina and the children had actually managed to find back to some semblance of normality. Neither Pip and her friends, nor the Tijat children had it easy in the past months. Seeing them able to laugh and play together again warmed his heart. Feeling really good for some reason, he returned to the workshop and got back to refining more composite plates from dragon scales and Scorpio's exoskeleton. He had already prepared the plates for the pauldrons, however, he wanted to make the cuirass first. The cuirass could be called the heart of the armor, as it would protect his torso and all the squishy, important stuff he needed to live. In anticipation of that, he planned on using 2 scales, one for the chest plate and one for the back plate, for his cuirass. Since he would die of exhaustion after just processing one, he would have to wait for tomorrow. To start with the cuirass in his best condition, he decided to start working on it the day after tomorrow. Seth already had an idea of what he would do in the meantime. He worked on solving something that had kept bothering him lately. While his enchantment and blacksmith skills had already reached craftsman level 7, his goldsmith skill had fallen far behind, only being level 4. Since he had a massive chunk of Ithilden from Poulter in storage, the Tower Master decided to show the mages of Minas Mar some love and create accessory sets using the Ithilden. The magical silver metal had not only an incredible magic conductivity, that could quicken the casting process, but it also showed properties similar to arcane gold and could inherently help gather mana. The blacksmith had no problem quickly coming up with a simple, but modern design. In a way, it was similar to the sanguine silver weapons he had made previously. By choosing the most practical design for the jewelry pieces, he was able to streamline the crafting process and become quicker and quicker in making them. Seth came up with 2 kinds of jewelry sets, that only differed in their enchantments. On one hand, there were those the members of Minas Mar would be able to earn with contribution points, on the other hand, there would be a set with the Oath effect, just like the Oath armor. Up to now, there were no standardized Oath Guard jewelry sets for the simple reason that he was lacking. Before, he was lacking in skills and materials. Now he had not just the Ithilden in abundance, but also souls. Thanks to soul trade, his supply of souls had stabilized. There was no reason to be stingy in the use of small and medium souls anymore. And his skills had vastly improved, compared to when he made the Oath armors. Infusing a soul allowed him to emulate the way magic enchantments worked to some extent, by not needing to engrave a formation directly onto the item. Depending on the soul, they would still need to use their own mana to power the item's effects, but this was not much different from most enchantments made by an enchanter. With his skills having reached craftsman level, he could now use up to 4 different effects by simplifying their circuits. He could now use the soul to carry some more effects, than just the Oath to Minas Mar, as it had been with the armors. With confidence in his skills and an abundance of resources, he saw no reason why not to create another reason for people to join and stay with Minas March. As he started, he also found that the souls Tunamol had given him were bigger in general than the ones Seth would collect when they dropped. From his experience of fusing souls, he knew that the size of the soul had to do with its inherent mana. The minimum sizes he found out were 100 mana to be a medium soul, 1000 to be a big soul, and 10,000 for massive souls. When he picked up drop souls, they were usually just above this threshold. The souls Tunamol gave him, however, were similar in size to the ones he would personally harvest. A medium soul could be any size between 100 and 1000, and a small soul could be anything between 1 and 100. Which meant the demon's collection method was definitely better than the system's random drops and slightly worse than Seth's harvesting, which had a good chance to preserve memories and even an ego. Why this was important now, was because this was the only reason the jewelry he was making now would differ in performance. Since he could only roughly guess the size of the soul, without using his appraisal skill, he would sometime end up with relic-rated Oath accessories or epic-rated general jewelry. The souls could be big enough to turn his enchantment into permanent effects, or not. Some were even big enough to offer additional mana for the wearer. This was not necessarily what Seth had planned, but it made the work slightly more exciting. Right? Where was the fun, if everyone would and could get the exact same gear? If they priced the items based on their performance, he was sure it would spark some healthy competition among the Oath Guard and the other people of Minas March. Aside from the Oath Guard, there were still the field teams, the Tijat and the Chimeras who were on their way back. Especially the latter were something Seth was looking forward to. The Chimeras had taken some time to counsel among themselves to decide whether they wanted to stay at Mount Agra or return. In the end, half of the Chimeras had only recently decided to return to Myanmar, while the others wanted to found a branch office of Myanmar in the mountain city. If they were willing, they would play a big part in the future of the trade route. This was one of the reasons why he enjoyed even this rather monotonous work. His thoughts could wander and his mind could relax. The average oath accessory looked something like this. Pendant of Oath. Epic. Durability, 1700. 1 plus 35% mana regeneration. 2 plus 25% mana cost reduction. 3 plus 15% chant reduction. 4 plus 50 int. 5 plus 50 will. 6 plus 150 mana. An epic necklace created by craftsman Smith from precious materials and enchanted through unknown means. A great item for any caster. Requirement: affiliated and loyal to Minas March. Chapter 584. Assistant needed. Ding. Goldsmith, craftsman, leave 4 had become goldsmith, craftsman, leave 5. In the morning of the day after tomorrow he finally managed to level his goldsmith skill. He had wanted to get at least this far, before he finally started working on his cuirass. Seth had several plates made from 2.5 scale he had made over the past 2 days. They were the parts of the cuirass, the gorget and the pauldrons. The first thing he did was get mentally prepared for the work and activate the different skills of Forge Right and Wraith Guard. Working with the composite materials was harder than he had expected. Considering that they were both materials with a high resistance to almost everything, it made sense. Knowing this still didn't make the work easier, but thinking of the end result made him able to pull through. Inspired by the original structure of the scorpion carapace, Seth decided on a design that diverted from his usually traditional style. The cuirass was more form-fitting and made of a few segments to allow for more mobility and flexibility. Obviously, also because Seth thought it would look pretty neat. Once he was in the right headspace he started swinging Karen's obel, parting and forging the almost black plates. He had to strike the metal with all his power. It was different from the vambraces. The individual plates were bigger and slightly thicker, which meant there was a lot more material to move. Having to split his concentration between forging and singing the forging ballad also didn't help. By the time he got to the parts for the back plate of the cuirass, he was already drenched in sweat and his muscles were screaming. Seth was also mentally exhausted from keeping up the forging ballad for this long. It was at this point that he put away everything for a moment and took a break. He drank some water and walked a little to cool off. This wasn't the way. Of course, he could pull through with brute force. But this was not how things were supposed to be. Facing the process of working with legendary, highly resistant material, forced Seth to make a decision. Cerberus, pause whatever you are doing. I need my assistant here. It was to use his forge assistant for the first time. The Tower Master decided that the merchandise for the turquoise anvil would not run out if he made Cerberus help him for a day or two. This was the way to deal with hard work in a smithy. He did not have to carry the entire burden. While Seth guided the hammer, Cerberus strike it at his signal to bring in the force. With the help of Cerberus, he roughly forged out the parts, all the while singing the forging ballad. With this method, the forging did not become much faster, but Seth was able to stay a lot calmer and more composed as he didn't have to exert as much force and energy. By the time the parts for the cuirass were roughly forged, the blacksmith still had the energy to also work out the tassets. They were the party of the cuirass that would cover the transition to the cuisse, the armor for the upper thigh. Since this armor would not feature an armored skirt, like the wyvern cuirass, he also planned for thorough leg protection this time. The armor would be overall less bulky than the wyvern cuirass, making it easier to wear the sky robe on top even when wearing the golden fleece and the sky silk clothes under it. Thank you, Cerberus. You can return to your work now, I will call you if I need you again. After forging all the parts with the golem's help, he took a short break to drink a recovery potion and eat a small meal. While he was eating he couldn't help thinking. Despite all the improvement his crafting stations gave him, he would have probably not managed to get this far in a day, without the help of Cerberus. When the potion showed its effects and he felt better, the blacksmith returned to his anvil. All that was left was refining the rough parts and assembling the cuirass today and then maybe completely finish it the next day. Using the anvil's horn and some other add-ons Seth started refining the parts they had previously forged out. It became evening when he decided that the parts for the cuirass, pauldrons, and gorget were clean enough to continue the next steps. It would have been easier to finish the gorget first, but similar to the pauldrons, he wanted to finish the cuirass first to adjust the gorget to the cuirass. The blacksmith used straps from the leftover leather of the shadow emoji, which he had used for Mina's armor, to attach the segments of the cuirass to each other. The reason was relatively simple. The leather's only attribute was darkness, which did not conflict with the already present power within the materials. It was a good thing that Puffles and Tatzel usually did their own thing when they were home at Mina's march. Otherwise, he would have needed to be a little more careful for Tatzel not to see the leather. Although they were related in name only, it could become an awkward moment if the snakelet found out. There might have even been some stupid misunderstanding. Like, who knew what the mind of a child would cook up? He was in the middle of assembling the cuirass when a head peeked in through the door to the workshop. "Tower Master?" the young man asked. "Yes." Seth looked up. He needed a moment to recognize the young man as one of the people under Mary. "Lord Mary sent me to inform you that the negotiations with the Adventurer Guild have finished. She wanted me to ask you, when you finished your current project, so you could talk about further proceeding pertaining to the trade route," the man explained. Seth looked at the half-finished cuirass and started thinking. He would probably need another day to finish this one, another 2 days for the pauldrons and gorget. "Let's go with a week. Is that okay?" "Of course, Tower Master. I will inform the Lord." With a nod, the man noted something down and vanished again. Seth doubted he would be able to finish the whole armor within a week, but it was probably enough to finish the most important parts. After the short distraction, the blacksmith returned to his work and managed to finish the cuirass just before midnight. Today he was leaving the workshop a little late, so Mina was already asleep. Usually, they would talk a little when he returned early from the workshop, but he couldn't blame her for not waiting. It seemed like the situation in the city kept getting worse over the past 2 days. Maybe he should visit Mary later and prepone the date a little. Maybe after he finished the cuirass? He would send Mary a notice. They caught up on the talk and talking in the morning of the next day before Mina left for Delta and Seth returned to the workshop. The cuirass still lacked its enchantments before he could work on the soul armament. For the enchantments, Seth decided on a mix of etchings and engravings. The piece he was going to etch in the center of the chest and back plate was called the Verse of Self-Immolation. This one was not long, which left space to add some enchantments in the form of inlays. The Verse of Self-Immolation was dedicated to Foraz, a high-ranking demon with many diverse powers, among which was granting increased defense. There were even rumors of invincibility. However, this was not the case for the Verse of Self-Immolation. The poem was quite straightforward and was a very simple example of the way most demonic enchantments functioned. The caster could choose to burn a resource in exchange for increased defense. It had a clear price and a clear effect. Although it was not possible to reach invincibility, thanks to the different buffs and soul trade he was able to majorly improve the efficiency of the exchange. He estimated that, if he chose to burn his mana with the maximum exchange rate, he would be able to quintuple his defense for 2 minutes. Seth chose this piece to try and trigger one of the lesser-known aspects of Apollo, as he was sometimes called a protector from evil and granted protection to children, refugees, and foreigners. The blacksmith hoped to tilt the balance to generate some kind of protective effect. The verse took a prominent place on the chest plate, right above the heart, while Seth hid the enchantment inlays among decorative carvings and inlays across the chest and back plate. For the inlays Seth also chose protection. Aside from the etchings, he used Olympian silver to inlay the complex formations for the shield and endurance enchantment. The reason he didn't choose to use Ithilden was purely based on the fact that the Olympian silver was not much worse in conductivity, but much more durable than the latter. It was just noon when he finished the cuirass and could finally start with the soul forging. As for the soul, Tanomol almost started crying when Seth chose it as the last free soul. Shield Maiden's soul, epic, massive, crafting material. The soul of a Valkyrie known from myths and legends. A great warrior apt wielding any combination of shield and other weapons. Affinities with strengthening magics and aerial combat. Chapter 585. Sargass. Although it was the wrong pantheon, Seth had chosen this soul because he thought it somewhat fit Tisiphone. Aside from both creatures, Erinyes and Valkyries, being winged women, Tisiphone was the fury of murder and retribution. The soul simply seemed quite fitting for Tisiphone's revenge, and Seth hoped it might bring in some other effects. Shaping the Shield Maiden's soul into a copy of the cuirass was a lot less energy-consuming than forging out the part from the composite materials. The time had come for the more heart-wrenching part of this build when he finally finished the ghostly cuirass. Because of their unique nature, he had to remove Tisiphone's revenge from the wyvern cuirass to use the enchantment it again. The blacksmith knew how to do it and it was quite simple. To remove the enchantment, he just had to forge out the sigil on the chest plate. Although it would not destroy the item, it would leave the wyvern cuirass unable to be enchanted ever again. It would return to the way it had been before, unable to be improved. It was a shame, but Seth couldn't get around it, that it was time for a change. The wyvern set would still be good enough to give someone else to wear. Seth's hammer was filled with a slight regret as he started to forge his mana into the fire glass and remove the sigil of Tisiphone. The pair of abstract wings became more and more blurry until they could be no longer recognized. The enchantments that looked like winding snakes stayed and couldn't be removed, making it impossible to add any enchantment onto the cuirass ever again. With the sigil defaced on the item, the enchantment was no longer grayed out in his enchantment catalog. He had just unlocked it again, only to immediately start working on the soul armament. Using the soul graver he transferred the abstract image of a pair of wings over onto the ghostly mirror image of the new cuirass. Just being glad that this wasn't a blessing and he wouldn't have to face the presence of Tisiphone as he engraved her sigil a second time, he quickly finished the enchantment. Like before, tendrils like winding snakes encroached on the whole soul armaments as the divine enchantment took effect. Despite knowing how it's done, Seth spat out a sigh of relief when he saw everything working. After all, this was his first time undoing an Olympian enchantment and redoing it somewhere else. All that was left, was to infuse the soul into the item and have the waters of Styx do their work. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! Several synergies of powers have changed your item. Ding! A synergy between materials and enchantment has changed your item. The proficiency gain had really fallen drastically after both enchantment and blacksmith had become level 7. At this rate, there was no telling how much he would have to craft to become a master. With this last addition, his dexterity had reached 199 points. He guessed that GE would gain another title once it reached the 200. He could have used one of the 2 attribute points he had earned, but he saved it. Since he was getting 1 bonus point on every attribute when he finished a legendary item, he would be able to gain a second title after he finished all armor parts. After checking his own stats, he finally took the black, shiny cuirass from the water and looked at it with his blacksmith's eyes. Sargass. Legendary. Scorpio set 1/X. Physical DEF, 6500. Mag, Def, 7400. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 plus 65 endurance. 9 passive skill, Shield Warrior's Constitution. 10 passive skill, Apollo's Shield. 11 passive skill, Tisiphone's Mirror. 12 active skill, Self-Immolation. Set effects, to be updated. Third part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers he created a piece that is seeking its equal. The nigh invincibility the armor grants is further augmented by some mystic means making it a bulwark that will hardly allow the wearer to die. Nobody would want to attack this thorny defense. Requirements, Seth Smith. The first thing he noticed was how his shield enchantment was not among the effects stated in the description. This probably had to do with the last notification he got, so he decided to keep looking into it. After checking all the skills that were added, it seemed like the shield enchantment had simply seeped into most of them. The first one was Shield Warrior's Constitution, which probably came from the Shield Maiden's soul. Passive skill, Shield Warrior's Constitution, no cost. Wearing a shield will automatically create a barrier with the durability and defense of the shield around the user. All basic defenses of shields and barriers are 15% stronger. Basic attack power improves by 5% when a shield is equipped. Seth was pretty sure that this was a standard skill for people with a warrior class that specialized in fighting with a shield and another weapon. Except for the barrier, which was most likely the effect of his enchantments. The next one was obviously the aspect of Apollo he had been aiming for, but it had also taken in some of the effects of the shield enchantments and maybe the soul. Passive skill, Apollo's Shield, no cost. Defense is increased by 10% when protecting others. 20% if they are strangers, refugees, or the young. When protecting others, Apollo's shield will immediately generate a barrier with the user's average defense in front of the user and those he is protecting. Duration, 30 SEC, cooldown, 2 minutes. Not only did it passively improve the defense, but also granted a timed barrier effect. This could come in handy, on one of those rare occasions when Seth decided to play the hero. Tisiphony's mirror had slightly changed compared to the time when it was on the Wyvern cuirass. Was this the effect of the Shield Maiden's soul? Passive skill, Tisiphony's mirror, no cost. Punishment is due. 50% of incoming damage will be reflected onto the attacker. 75% chance to cause either disease or illness. A chance to cause torturing madness when special conditions are met. Before it would reflect 50% of suffered damage as retribution. The description changed by only a few words, but this slight change had huge effects. Incoming meant that it was reflected before the other armor effects would negate or weaken it. Tisiphony's mirror was now the same as damage reflection, but he had no idea which had priority. The two effects wouldn't act at the same time. The question was, would Tisiphony's reflect 50% first and damage reflection 40% of what was left? Or was it the other way around? Either way, he would enjoy 70 to 75% damage reflection before anything was even processed by the armor. Thinking about this, and taking the other effects into account, he thought that the item description was almost making light of the armor. After all, there was still the skill of self-immolation, which was pretty much how it was described. Active skill, self-immolation cost, X mana/stamina/mental energy, duration, 2 minutes. Raise overall defense by 3x by burning resources. Seth wore the armor and tested it to gain a better understanding. He came to the conclusion that this would have been a great skill for something like a magician with generally low defense. This skill mostly depended on one's resources and how much one was willing to pay. Since stamina and mental strength were hidden stats, Seth used his mana to test it. He paid 30 mana, which burned away at 5 mana per second. In exchange he gained 90 points in magic and physical defense for 126 seconds. 2 minutes, and the time it took to burn the mana. He was able to technically buy slightly more duration by paying a lot. In general, he would not have to use this skill, thanks to the armor. But there were definitely places where it would come in handy, especially as it tied it with the other skills of the cuirass. Overall defense would be directly added to his average defense. He currently had over 5,000 mana without the improvements of items, thanks to the augmentation from his second class. If he really went strong, he could improve by a lot and still have mana to fight. And this was only judging on mana. He still had other resources he could burn in case of an emergency. All this meant was that he was satisfied with everything. He was really proud of the Sargass, even though he still didn't know where the system was pulling these names from. He stretched and got back to work. The day was still relatively young and the outcome of the cuirass had greatly motivated him to continue. Chapter 586. Gertab. Seth now had to decide what to do next, between the pauldrons and the gorget. The parts were mostly finished. All that was left were assembly, adjustment, and enchantment for both of them. After some pondering, he decided to first make the gorget and then make sure to pauldrons fit the cuirass and gorget. He started off by marking out the area for the demonic etching. Befitting the demon it was dedicated to, he wanted to arrange it as a decorative collar. The demon in question was Phoenix, a great demon of poetry. With how much the bard had found about this demon in the Bard College's library, one could call this demon something like a patron saint of demonic bards. Whenever a bard was stuck and needed the inspiration to write a song or poem, they would call upon Phoenix and beg for advice. Seth had literally found thousands of pieces in the library. Of course, he didn't read all of them, only those fit for crafting until he decided on which to use. The right setting, spacing, and aesthetic could not be underestimated when it came to demonic etchings, especially if they would also serve as a decorative ornament on the armor. During the channeling, the demon would see what the bard was doing and get an idea of what the plan was. Depending on how much the demon liked the work, it could lower the cost. It was quite similar to how during the Olympic enchantments, the gods would give better or worse blessings depending on whether they liked the item. This was especially true with artistic demons like a Henex, which was why Seth was especially meticulous. There were other demons with similar powers, but Seth liked Phoenix for the same reason most other bards did. He could pay the demon up front and enjoy the effects without any further subscription costs. A normal bard would sacrifice something depending on their deal with the demon. This could range from materials good to more incorporeal things. Obviously, Seth was paying in souls. The poem he was etching was literally just called the Phoenix and was made up of a lot of praise for the demon. It was times when these greater beings took notice and looked over his shoulder when Seth really felt the difference between himself and the gods. They were not like the self-proclaimed monsters from the beyond. Just their presence made clear that they existed on another plane. Now was one of those times, when he could feel the demon's eyes resting on his work, as he channeled its power and used soul trade to pay up. A wave of relief washed over him when the presence finally vanished after finishing the etching. From what he could see, for now, it seemed to have been quite successful. He used a towel to wipe away some sweat and drank something. The next steps were some complementary engravings and the complex engraving of willpower that would frame the poetic etching. He repeated the technique to use inlays from Olympian silver and quickly finished the enchantment to start with the soul. It was a shame that he was unable to find a fitting soul at Tanamol's Soul Emporium, which was why he almost bought a massive common soul until he saw the price. While the common and medium-sized ones were relatively cheap, the price jumped exponentially. Seeing how a massive soul cost 20 gold, he rather opted to buy another 500 medium-sized souls for a fraction and fuse them together to get a massive common soul. Looking at the prices, if he ever had a problem with money, he could opt to simply refine souls and sell them. After forging the common massive soul into a soul armament gorget, Seth got to the Olympian enchantment. It was called Mnemosyne's Gifts. Mnemosyne was the titan of memory and goddess of a river of the same name in the underworld. Seth recently found out that she was also the mother of the muses and one of the elder muses known as song, practice, and memory. He was slightly ashamed that he seldom used the ring with her blessing. Although her blessing had little to do with the fine arts, he hoped that her gifts would give something that fit the rest of the enchantment. Taking into account her standing as an elder muse, there was at least a chance. The depiction of her sigil gave him hope as it reminded him of a feather quill. As he engraved it, rows of illegible text started covering the soul gorget, raising his hope. All that was left was infusing it and finishing the item. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! Several synergies of powers have changed your item. Ding! Title, Quick Hands gained. Your dexterity has reached 200 points +2 universal attribute points. No special notification about the synergies, but he had gained a new title. This was also good. He decided to store the 2 points for the time being, just like he did with the points he gained from the Trignus gloves. Now it was time to check his gains. Gertab. Legendary. Scorpio set 1/X. Physical DEF 2500. Mag, Def 2400. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 plus 65 willpower. 9 active skill, quick tongue. 10 passive skill, persuasive voice. 11 passive skill, Apollo's poetry. 12 passive skill, memorable speech. 13 passive skill, inspiration of Phoenix. Set effects, to be updated. Fourth part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. An item any poet and spokesperson would desire, though a gorget would be a weird item for them to wear. Requirements, Seth Smith. There were several passive skills that would improve the practical usage of speechcraft. Persuasive voice has a similar effect to voice of Seth, making it easier to convince people based on the personality attribute. Memorable speech struck a similar chord. The description was vague, but it talked about giving inspiration during speeches and making them linger longer in the mind of the listener. This seemed like a tame effect at first, but if one thought about it, it was a very powerful skill. The longer a speech stayed in someone's mind, the easier it was for the word to convince them, given time. Apollo's poetry improved all lyrical skills like songwriter and poetry by 2 levels. It was a mirror to the inspiration of Phoenix, which made writing artistic texts easier by giving random inspirations. For a relatively small part of the armor, it featured some great effects pertaining his bardic class. Equipping the cuirass, gorget, and vambraces to check that everything so far fit, he marveled at his image in the mirror. The dark armor with a red hue had a wicked charm with its sleek design. Despite the scorpion carapace making up the biggest part of the materials and being the main inspiration for the design, it still gave of the impression of a reptile. The aura of the dragon scales was still so overpowering, that the armor reminded him of a part of a dragon, but it was so big, that the human brain cannot quite fathom what part of the giant creature it was looking at. Very satisfied with his current progress, Seth decided to finish for the day. He was in quite a good mood when he left his workshop. After a moment he felt something was not right. He didn't quite know what. Was it one of his precognitive skills warning him? No, it took another moment for him to realize what it was. The hallway was silent. Usually, it would be filled by the sounds of hammers this time around. Whedon and Hone, the two dwarfs, were not working despite it only being early evening. Slightly concerned, he took a look at their workshops. He found the two sitting in Whedon's workshop with several bottles of booze and two giant tankards in their hands. What was going on? Are you two okay? Did something happen? The blacksmith asked concernedly. Don't act like you actually care, hick, about us. Whedon slurred in a drunken voice. Tower Master is Sishamini. Hone added his important opinion just as drunk. Seth had a hard time processing what they were talking about. Hone sighed a woeful sigh and took a big swig of booze. Look at this awesome armor, and we weren't there to see it. Whedon lamented. Seth was still wearing the armor. Those fine scales, we will never see it, hick. Whedon agreed with his drinking buddy. They kept soaking in their own misery until Seth finally realized what they were on about. His heart fell when he finally remembered his promise. After bragging about his awesome dragon scales to the two dwarfs, he had promised them to let them watch him when he processes them. However, he had forgotten over planning out the armor and getting all the pieces needed. Seth had been working on the armor for a few days now, while the dwarfs had been marinating in sorrow that he had forgotten about them. He felt bad, but what was he supposed to say to make them feel better? He went with the easiest way and told them the truth. I'm sorry, guys. I got too focused on the work and forgot my promise. Seth knew that a simple apology wouldn't make everything okay again. His thoughts kept racing when a random inspiration hit. How about instead of watching me work on it, I let you guys help? How about some hands-on experience with legendary items? Once the pauldrons were done, he would have to forge more composite material for the armor. Instead of using Cerberus as his assistant, he offered the dwarfs to help in. The blacksmith maniac's eyes lit up in excitement when he explained it to them. Chapter 587. Not a butterfly. Are you ready? He asked Mary as they met up in Minasmar's business building on the surface. Fortunately, the drunk dwarfs were easily appeased after offering them such an opportunity, and Seth was able to get to bed with a relieved conscience. He was able to get a good night of sleep to get ready for today's appointment. He spent the whole morning as Mina's dress-up doll to find the right outfit to make him look like a stylish, modern businessman. It was a little hard for her since he insisted on wearing at least the new gorget under the outfit. Yes, but are you really sure about your plan? The secretary asked unsurely. It was not like Seth couldn't understand her doubts. The initial plan of having the Adventurer Guild set up branches beside the higher-level dungeons to further their business on the currently finished part of the trade route. There were no doubts about the success of this plan. However, as a reaction to the changes in Delta, the blacksmith had made some adjustments to the original plan. Somebody had put a lot of work into worsening the already dire situation of the refugees from Sigma and tried to put the blame on them. It was quite clear that they had plans for this helpless and despairing mass of people. All the more reason to show them that they messed with the wrong morally questionable businessmen. They had given him a crowd of impressionable citizens, and he would make damn sure to not even leave crumbs for the puppet masters hiding in the dark. Like in Ivice, it was not weird for small settlements to develop around profitable dungeons and the Adventurer Guild's branches. The Bard was hell-bent on quickening the process, by a lot. However, he didn't want to take the full brunt of possible backlash's correction, he wanted to share the glory with others. Sprinkle some publicity onto the Adventurer Guild and some important figures of Delta, dangle the possible profits in their face to make them join. A new gold rush. A great solution to the current societal problems. A way out of despair for the poor refugees of Sigma. Who wouldn't fork out some money and support to make a name with this? The guild had already bought into their development project. Today they would meet with the guild and some other figures Mary and the guild and pulled to their side. Although it was Seth's idea, he couldn't claim to be a man versed in all walks of life. He had little idea about actual politics and how this kind of stuff should be handled. He was the visionary, and that was why he needed people like Mary and the teams she built to take care of the formalities. Having the Adventurer Guild as a partner in this was already a great reassurance. The guild was trustworthy because they were not some run-of-the-mill profit-oriented corporation. One could call the Adventurer Guild the Church of the Dungeon God. The biggest service to their god was making sure that dungeons stayed busy. What exactly the dungeon god gained from this was nebulous, probably entertainment, but it was one of the main goals of the guild. This meant that by offering to build cities in the regions with dungeons, they would become a strong ally in the implementation of the plan. What was Seth's role in the end? He was the one with the idea and the one in charge of persuading others. The face of the operation to pull in the money. He also had some of the greatest power when it came to bribing people. An epic item here or a relic-rated armor piece there could grease quite some gears. This was the kind of event they were visiting today. It was called negotiations, but in the end, it was a small banquet with important people that had great interest and potential as allies. Now, Seth couldn't be called a social butterfly. It was correct to say that his social skills were barely average, and it had taken him a good while to develop this far from the quasi-hermit he had turned into before the apocalypse. It was here, that his items, skills, and attribute values really came in handy. Especially channeling Ronwi at times, as he did during his speech to the vampires, really helped get past the awkward moments when he didn't know what to say. Seth really was not born for rhetoric battles of wits, which made having a demonic cheat sheet even more important. Otherwise, he might really fall back on telling them the truth. Of course, telling the truth and having an eye for people were great if one wanted to find good allies. But when facing greedy business sharks, it was important to stay atop the game. The blacksmith was actually glad to barely retain anything about the party afterward. He had talked and talked and talked too much hogwash to remember it all. At least Mary seemed very satisfied with the outcome of this event. Just to make it clear, this won't become a regular thing. The bard was exhausted, more so mentally than physically. He would much rather get back in his workshop and make items, than experience something like this again. How did the social butterfly kind of people endure this torture? Sure. This is my job after all. You just have to hold the speech during the press conference next week to announce the project. After that, you can leave everything to me. All right then. They returned to Minas Mar in the late evening. Returning to his quarter, he found Mina drinking alone. It seemed like stuff happened again. Seth spent the rest of his day talking with her and distracting his girlfriend from the dire situation in Delta. You guys ready? He greeted the two giddy dwarfs when he came down to the workshops the next morning. The two were stoked to take part in the refinement process. Although Seth had the parts for the pauldrons ready, he didn't want to let Hone and Whedon wait too long. That was why he decided to refine the material for the cuisses, the armor for the thigh, in the morning and finish the pauldrons later. Let's go, the two cheered in sync. Although the two were still aspiring journeymen and a tier lower than Seth's skills, it did not matter for this kind of work, since they would only augment him with mana and strength. The skill level of a blacksmith wouldn't have any great impact. Like before with Cerberus, Seth led with Karen's obel while the two dwarfs took turns swinging a pair of heavy hammers. This allowed Seth to completely concentrate on injecting his power and melding the two materials together. The trio actually managed more than just refining the material. Although the dwarfs were panting heavily and their sweat was running as if they were drenched in rain, they finished roughing out the parts for the cuisses in the morning. Great work! You should go and get some rest, he praised the two exhausted but happy dwarfs. The blacksmith was really satisfied with their progress. Approaching the end, they had become really good at assisting him. Looking at the parts they had finished, he would probably only have to put in an hour or two to refine them to a state where he could enchant them. Can't we watch you work, while resting? Whedon asked, still motivated. Well, sure, why not, the bard answered after some slight hesitation. He could treat it as a concert for them. Chapter 588. Shala. Seth tried to be not affected by his sudden audience and started working on the pauldrons. The blacksmith gave the pauldrons a polish before getting the acid and brush ready. The text he had chosen was another long one, but it would be worth it. The text was actually a short prose of Larage the demon archer and his legendary journey. Larage was born with the bow in his hand and the quiver at his side. With his great skills as a hunter and sharpshooter, he earned his standing among primordial demons. Seth liked it because it was a prose that lacked much of the generic butt-kissing. In exchange for the less flowery speech, it used more ancient runes that resembled hieroglyphs, making the text almost like a picture book depicting the story. Although having the dwarf's watch made him feel awkward at first, he quickly became focused and did no longer register the looks of the dwarfs that were glued to his every move and action. Seth channeled the demonic marquee, keeping in mind his desire for the enchantment. What he wished for from Larage was a pure improvement of his archery skills. Although the demon archer also offered things like arrows that would putrefy wounds, the bard already had a bunch of options for this. What he was looking for was pure skill, which would allow him to better utilize the options he already had. Of course, it was also to trigger this aspect of Apollo, though Seth didn't know how that would turn out. Reacting to the blacksmith's pure desires, the etchings of Larage's prose filled with a demonic power that colored them in a silver glow, giving a contrast to the black materials and its red hue. When Seth turned around to bring the pauldrons to the anvil, he almost got a heart attack, facing the searchlight gazes of the two dwarfs. He had completely forgotten about Hona-Weden while working on the etching. The next part would be very boring to the dwarfs, as they were unable to see souls. For them, Seth was probably hitting air, accompanied by the dampened sounds of hitting something. In the case of the pauldrons, Tanomol was no big help again. He didn't have some special archer's soul. Not even a big one. Since he couldn't get something that immediately fit, Seth bought uncommon archer souls in bulk. The blacksmith couldn't help but ask how Tanomol had this many uncommon souls of basic classes. According to the soul trader, these were souls found on battlefields. The bard got a little jealous of the demon. Since the demon had interdimensional sources, he always had someone that could go around and scour the battlefield of their respective world. When he asked why then there were no better archer souls, the demon heard and tried to explain. Battlefields could be a dangerous business, especially in worlds steeped with magic. If left alone, they were a terrible breeding ground for powerful undead. For the safety of his associates, these souls were all from fresh battlefields which had little time marinating in the dreadful environment of the battlefield. Although he was sure there was more to it, Seth was satisfied with that explanation. On that day he had bought 301 medium-sized archer souls of uncommon and rare rating. Now he was fusing and refining them. With the experience he had gathered while refining, breaking, and repairing egos, Seth felt amply prepared for the task. However, he had wildly underestimated the chaos created by fusing this many above common souls. Common soul could be seen as almost empty containers. The remnants of memories were almost negligible. However, uncommon souls had a greater recollection of their lives. These retained memories made it possible for them to have special effects. But not all of their memories would act in favor of these abilities. Especially broken and scrambled memories of their past life could get in the way by mixing with the scrambled remnants of their experiences pertaining to their skills. According to his experience, the rating of the soul was based on size, how much memory was still intact, and the cohesion of these memories that would lead to the soul having special effects or powers. The higher the rating, the better the memories. However, the lower the rating, the more useless and unintelligible waste was contained. This time he had forged together over 300 souls, with most being uncommon. Although the rating jumped to rare, because of the size becoming massive, the inside was just a mess. A mess he would have to refine. During this ordeal, the dwarfs watched the blacksmith beating the air for hours as sweat started soaking his clothes. They appreciated the great hammer work, however, their excitement was slightly dampened by the fact that they couldn't see what Seth was hammering. After several hours of extracting the most chaos, Seth's mana was already getting close to emptying out when he suddenly heard a notification. Ding! A synergy between your trait Olympian myths and the item's properties has changed your material. The blacksmith's heart fell in surprise as he got jump-scared by this notification. It was the first time he heard about a synergy with his crafting materials. Still, in wonder about how this happened, he first decided to check what it did to the soul. Soul of the Taxotai, massive, epic, crafting material. Our arrows will blot out the sun. The will of many iron-blooded archers dwells in this soul. They may have died, but their skills and motivation live on. The soul shows affinity with a myriad of archer skills and mental fortitude. He kept staring at the soul as he tried to understand why this happened. Of course, he was happy, but he was more confused about the how. After a while, he was sure it had to do with his trait Olympian myths. What had changed? When he thought about this, he had an epiphany. When he got the blessing of Apollo and Eos, it also said that his trait was strengthened. At that time he thought it was about the addition of their names to the list of the skills. What he expected was that items would have a tiny chance to connect with myths pertaining to the two, as their connection was only described as weak. But maybe the trait strengthening meant that it could come to synergies with more than finished items? This would explain the change of the soul. Looking up, he saw the two dwarfs looking at him with slightly worried expressions. He gave them a sheepish smile and continued after relaxing his shoulders a little. He stretched the soul into two parts, only connected by a thin thread, and started soul forging them. After the arduous refining, turning the soul into two soul armament pauldrons was the smallest problem. Seeing the soul armament made from the soul, he got a glimpse at what an affinity with a myriad of archer skills meant. An epic soul manifesting effects or skills was not out of the ordinary, but there usually were not this many. The soul armament alone already granted the skills bow mastery, sniper's focus, multi-shot, and a skill called volley of 300. With the last one probably being a skill unique to this soul, as it allowed one to shoot all the ammunition on hand at once at a target area. "Our arrows will blot out the sun," was not an empty threat. It was a very real promise if one had enough arrows. The soul armament was already great and now he was going to add an Olympian enchantment on top of it. The enchantment he chose was the Blessing of Menoetius. He was a titan known for his terrible strength, but also an overblown ego. Seth made sure not to think such thoughts during the enchantment, for the same reasons. He was just glad that Menoetius had no overbearing presence, unlike he expected. He seemed like a simple man, appreciative of the work of a blacksmith. His sigil resembled a bull's horns and the engravings that spread from it were like taut ropes or sinew. The skill it gave the soul armament matched with what the blacksmith had expected. He infused the finished soul into the pauldrons. The notifications dinged through as the item was finished in the waters of Styx. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! Several synergies of powers have changed your item. Shala. Legendary. Shala set 1/2. Scorpio set 1/X. Physical DEF 2400. Mag, Def 2600. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 passive skill, Larrage's archery. 9 active skill, Apollo's light arrow. Legendary Shala set effects. Passive skill, Sniper's focus. Active skill, multi-shot. Active skill, volley of 300. Active skill, Apollo's rain of light. Active skill, power of Menoetius. Scorpio set effect, to be updated. Fifth part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. One of a pair of pauldrons any archer would dream to own. Requirements, Seth Smith. Chapter 589. Karina's input. Seth almost choked at the number of additional skills. He needed a moment to grasp that there were 7 additional skills that came with the pauldrons. The moment Hone and Whedon got a glimpse at the pauldron, they started worshipping him and wouldn't stop. It just made it harder to concentrate on the items. Most were self-explanatory. Larrage's archery gave a basic improvement of everything archery related, similar to the passive bonus a common or uncommon archer class would get. The skill that was developed by Apollo's divine power as a counterweight was Apollo's light arrow. Active skill, Apollo's light arrow, 50 mana, no cooldown. Use mana to generate and fire a high-speed arrow made of pure sunlight. The projectile will deal 200% of your basic magic damage in light attributed damage. Seeing this skill, Seth could already guess one of the bigger synergies down the line. Apollo's Rain of Light. It was a synergy of volley of 300 and Apollo's light arrow. Active skill, Apollo's Rain of Light, cost, 5000 mana, no cooldown. Generate 300 light arrows at once and shoot them at the target area. Projectiles will deal 150% of your basic magic damage in light attributed damage and have a 5% to cause slow and burn. Now 300 didn't sound like a lot, but the skill was a bargain, even with the lowered damage, as each arrow only cost roughly 17 mana compared to the 50 if he generated them one by one. Seth's current base mana only counting his attributes and soul armaments had reached 13,000, which was barely comparable to a dedicated mage. However, if he generated the light arrows individually he would only be able to make 250. This way he could use this skill twice and shoot 600. If he was faced with bigger numbers of enemies, this was a viable option, if he didn't want to reveal any of his other trump cards. The dwarfs almost got a heart attack when Seth suddenly drew his bow to check the handling of the skill. The bard quickly understood how the skill worked. Similar to MMOs, he would see a circle for the target area, however, he could manipulate this shape before activating the skill. They were only very basic changes such as increasing or shrinking the area or elongating it in a direction. Size would also impact the accuracy of the attack. However, the blacksmith didn't worry about the accuracy. Not only that he now had skills like Larach's archery that improved accuracy, but he had his Mind Reaper bow. The very first effect of the bow was arrows shot with this bow show great malice and will aim to hit vital points. Seth would have to test it, but he was sure the effect would also count for the arrows of light, meaning he could shoot 300 aimed missiles at a crowd. Even when it was no 100% guarantee, Seth could also somewhat rely on his relatively high luck attribute to do the rest. The skill alone was powerful but had its drawbacks. But the combination of Seth's items and skills more than made up for them, making the skill an almost unfair bargain against big numbers of enemies. The only skill that had little to do with archery on the pauldrons was the Power of Menoetius. Active skill, Power of Menoetius, no cost, cooldown, 15 minutes, duration, 5 minutes. For 5 minutes you gain a fraction of the power of Menoetius, increasing your physical damage by 5 times. Afterward, you will enter a state of weakening for 10 minutes. In the weakened state, your melee damage and movement speed will be reduced to 1/5. Skills like this existed in almost every media and game, so Seth was not really surprised about it. They offered a huge improvement of strength at the cost of being weakened afterward. In theory, these kinds of skills were rather balanced. That was if one wasn't overgeared like Seth. With the kind of defense the armor offered and his other abilities, the blacksmith did not have to rely on melee damage and speed. Seth doubted there were many things in this world that could kill him, even if he just stood there. Of course, that was once he finished the armor. If he had to critique something, then it was the stinginess of the system. He had obviously made 2 pauldrons. But for some bullcrap reason, he only got credited for creating 1 legendary item. This was 1 point in personality and luck lost. Well, 1 point lost in all attributes, but these 2 hurt the most. Of course, he would still manage to raise his luck to 100 with the point gained from the attribute titles, but still. He felt slightly robbed. It was only a minor thought. He was a magnanimous person and would not hold it against the system. The blacksmith rolled his shoulders and bent back and forth to test the interaction of the finished armor parts. After finding no major flaws, he finally turned to the 2 dwarfs. "I'm finished for today. Are you guys satisfied watching me work?" He couldn't help but grin at their awkward expressions. They couldn't see souls, so there wasn't a whole lot to see for them after he was done with the etchings. However, the dwarfs didn't know what to answer. On one hand, it was them who had insisted on watching, on the other, they really had not gained a lot. But they couldn't tell their tower master that they were bored, right? "It's okay, let's leave." It was already too late to start anything else, so he decided to end it for the day. The 3 left the workshop to go visit the canteen and grab something to eat when someone approached them. "Seth, do you have a moment?" Karina, the dryad, suddenly approached them on the hallway. Sure. Excuse me, Hone, Whedon." He gave the dwarfs an apologetic look and followed Karina. Although he wanted to eat, it wasn't often the dryad approached him, so it was probably something important. "How can I help you, Karina?" he asked once they sat back down in the workshop. "Mary told me about your plans for the trade route," she started off. Apparently, Mary had made a deal with the Adventurer Guild. Seth had a vague recollection of talking about this during the banquet. But the evening was long and they said a lot. It was a plan for the expansion of the trade route further towards the direction of Beta. She didn't know the details, but this was how Karina had found out more details about the changed plans for the trade route. "I had an idea that could help, further than just giving protection under the crown of the tree. I believe I could help build the accommodations." At first, he thought she meant help with building materials, but the dryad continued to explain. "Did you ever read of elves? The children kept talking about a race living in harmony with nature, that managed to build their houses in trees, without killing them." "Yes," he asked slowly. Well, I wanted to try something like that myself, and after hearing about the plans I have been experimenting a little. I want to try doing it on a bigger scale to show you." "A bigger scale?" He was slowly getting the scope of what the tree lady was talking about and the implications. Yes. I couldn't do it here, but I want to try it at one of the trees on the route from here. With your permission, I will go and start right away. I'm sure it won't take long if you want to take a look, she said excitedly when she saw that Seth was not opposed to her idea. The blacksmith didn't expect her to be so motivated in involving herself. She had already helped so much with raising the trees along the path, now she wanted to help build accommodations? A bigger man might have thought of her own good and asked her to take a step back and care for her health. Say something like you already did enough. Maybe offer her to concentrate on her time with the children. Seth was not like that. He wasn't going to stop her. She seemed very willing to help and Seth was always glad to have help. The bard was the last person to snub somebody that wanted to help him. He was also the last person to force someone to help him. Okay, you have my permission. I give my speech next week Friday, you have time until then to show me what you can do. He was very interested in what the Dryad would be able to accomplish in the roughly 10 days before the press conference. If it was viable, he wouldn't say no. Chapter 590. Alniyat. Although Seth was eager to continue, it was important to take breaks. After completely exhausting Hone and Whedon the other day, he decided to be a good example and take a break, too. The blacksmith grabbed Mina and gave her a compulsory break as well, to go on a date. It had been a while since they just strolled through the city together. Oh wow, is this for real? Seth exclaimed in happy surprise when he saw the announcement of a new movie in a cinema. The advertisements described it as a new kind of movie. A real kind of movie. Real magic, real stunts. The introduction of the system into modern society had finally found its way into the entertainment industry of Delta. Using magic and skills instead of special effects and filming with flying golem drones were some of the highlighted selling points. Although it was nothing new for the people of Krna, for example, it was a revolution for Earth. Especially since Krna already had a well-developed entertainment industry. Seth could only imagine the kind of impact skills would have, once a kind of peace truly settled in. Even though that would probably still take quite a while. It was a frightening thought if idol groups and boy bands were no longer assisted by just auto-tune, but also powerful bardic skills. Stars could use items to improve their personality, attribute and illusion magic to improve their looks. There was also the introduction of other races. The amount of otherworldly P*RN that would flood the market was hard to imagine. However, Seth didn't feel like thinking too much about these implications. For one, he really wanted to simply enjoy a movie with Mina. On the other hand, all of this would only have a chance if they managed to overcome whatever the Age of Gods would throw at them. The movie was inspired by the current time they were living in. Tragic love story in a broken world that was overrun by monsters. Although the story seemed a little awkward and rough around the edges, it really shone with the usage of magic and skills as special effects. Afterward, they ate out. It was a fine dining restaurant with a good reputation. However, it only helped Seth to realize how good Link had become at cooking. Compared to the food in Mina's Mars canteen, the food in the restaurant was edible at best. Of course, Seth would say no to food, but he realized that his palate had gotten used to high-quality stuff that was cooked with high-level skills and expertise. Despite the slight disappointment, their mood didn't lower at all. Mina had a hard time relaxing at first, but over the course of the day, she finally managed to let go of her worries and enjoy their time together. It was a little funny, that it was Seth's turn to cheer up the beast woman when it was usually her with the bright personality. Even when there were problems in Delta, it didn't mean everything was bad. This realization may have been more important for Mina than for Seth. After a relaxing day, Seth returned to the workshop. Hone and Whedon were still on compulsory break, which gave Seth the time to continue on the leg armor in peace and quiet. Seth and the dwarfs had roughly finished the quiz the other day. All he needed to do was refine the parts to fit his thighs and make sure the knee joints fit before he could assemble the pair of leg guards. Once everything was assembled and fit him without problems, he could continue with the enchantments. The thigh plates were reserved for the etching, while he was going to put a complex formation on the attacked knee joints. For the etching, he revisited an acquaintance, Vipar of the Deep. A demon of the sea, but this time had not chosen him because of his powers to cause putrid wounds or storms, or water affinity. Vipar had another power. It was to safely guide armored ships laden with weapons and ammunition on their journey. This coincided with one of Apollo's aspects, to grant a safe journey to travelers and seafarers. Part of the aspect could be attributed to him being a god of bards, who would always travel to learn and propagate their songs and lyrics. It was also related to being a protector deity for foreigners, refugees, and fugitives. Seth didn't like to travel around, but if he did, he could really do without random encounters that gave him a headache. Like the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond, just to name an example. He had gained a bunch of goodies, but he really could do without the stress. What did some old general like to say? The best fight is the one that can be avoided. The etching of Vipar would grant something along the line of safe travels on the sea, given some requirements. The etching Seth prepared for the knees was water walking specifically for those traveling on the sea. Water walking was a complex formation that could grant the passive skill to walk on water as if on solid ground. Just the walking on water part was actually not what made the formation complex, but all the precautions that needed to be taken care of, so the wearer wouldn't be crushed to death by a solid ocean wave. An unsettling thought was that somebody somewhere was probably crushed to death by a solid ocean wave, which made all these additional changes necessary for the safety of the wearer. Seth had gotten used to process of etching and engraving over the past days, and especially his mastery of demonic runes had majorly improved. It became obvious in his calligraphy and working speed. With the practice of the last few days, he was cruising through the enchanting and was finished in a matter of hours. Just in time to get a meal from the canteen before returning to start with the soul armament. This soul had a peculiar story. It was the soul of a special breed of werewolf called a Feyalod. The reason Seth knew the soul's story was because he was quite skeptical upon hearing about it. These werewolves were actually benign in their behavior, often helping children, women, and those who lost their way. It was technically perfect for what he planned, however. If it was really such a benign creature, Seth was doubtful of who would kill it and capture its soul. After all, Tunomol guaranteed that the souls he sold were not acquired by nefarious means. Let's see, this is a soul from a soul contract. The werewolf promised his soul in exchange for the deed of a big piece of land for his ancestors. He later died of old age before the soul was collected, the goat had explained readily after skimming through his papers. Only after checking the papers, did Seth feel assured and purchased it. It did not only fit with the theme of protection and safe travel but also the Olympian enchantment he chose. After getting the soul in shape, similar to how he did it with the pauldrons, it was time for the enchantment. The one he chose for the queen was the blessing of Rhea, the mother of Zeus. As a mother goddess, she had aspects of protection, nature, and animal wildlife. It was also the feeling he got from the presence that was looking over his shoulder as he initiated the engraving. It was a warm aura, one that made one feel safe, at peace, and at home. It felt like a warm hand on his shoulder was guiding him as he engraved the rune, looking like a very stylized animal and tree. The engraving that spread across the soul armament looked like lush vines with big leaves. Although Rhea's presence was powerful, it was very calming and not as overbearing as those he had experienced before. The blacksmith was almost a little sad when it was gone. He stood for a moment in trance, savoring what he had just experienced. When he finally found back to his senses, he infused the 2 soul quizzes into the actual items and handed them to the waters of Styx. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between material and enchantment has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between your trait Olympian myths and the item has changed its properties. Ding! Your skill blacksmith, craftsman, leave 7 has become blacksmith, craftsman, leave 8. Ding! Your skill enchantment, craftsman, leave 7 has become enchantment, craftsman, leave 8. Aside from the news he expected, he was also pleasantly surprised by the level up of his skill. His enchantment and blacksmith finally crept over the precipice of leave 7 and became level 8. Alniyat. Legendary. Alniyat set 1/2. Scorpio set 1/X. Physical DEF 2500. Mag, Def 2500. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 passive skill, Vipar's protection. 9 passive skill, water walking. 10 passive skill, Apollo's intervention. Legendary Alniyat set effects. Passive skill, Rhea's protection. Passive skill, animal amity. Passive skill, forest protection. Active skill, Apollo, take the wheel. Scorpio set effect, to be updated. 7th part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. One of a pair of quizzes any traveler would love to have. Requirements: Seth Smith. Again, like with the pauldrons, he only got 1 point per attribute because the quizzes were a set and all the skills connected to the soul were set effects if both were worn. He found that Vipar's skill had been slightly influenced. Passive skill: protection of Vipar, no cost. Improves the defense of those who identify as an armored sea vessel laden with weapons and ammunition. Those wearing full plate armor. By 25%. Lowers the chance of storms and other bad weather on journeys by 10%. The addition of full plate armor was new and he also not expected a protection from bad weather. His original plan was the combination of Vipar and water walking. If he wore full armor, was able to traverse the sea, and had an inventory full of weaponry, then didn't he identify as an armored sea vessel laden with weapons and ammunition? On another note, Apollo's intervention had been the skill he wanted, lowering the chance to meet hostile entities by 35% when traveling. A true surprise was Rhea's protection, which granted him 75% immunity against basic Earth attacks. In addition, animal amity was the same as undead amity. Wild animals would show no hostility to Seth. However, this only counted for ordinary animals, and not monsters. The forest protector was the effect of the wolf's soul. The description was quite vague, telling him that the forest would protect him and help him find his way. Seth wasn't keen on spending time in forests, but he wouldn't say no to free buffs. Lastly, there was active skill: Apollo, take the wheel, 50 mana per minute. In emergency situations only, let the divine power of Apollo guide your steps to safely continue a journey. Seth had no idea what to say about this skill. Chapter 591. You dare. Delta. Yarg. Using his tiger cloud step and his spear force, he easily pierced through the chest plate of the team's leader. It was pathetic how easily these people went down, he thought arrogantly. Of course, in total disregard of the fact that he was invisible and did a surprise attack. Tisk, useless natives. They really need me to step up to deal with this kind of vermin, the invisible attack scoffed as he pulled out the spear tip from his victim's stomach. The bloodied weapon turned to the rest of the man's group. They all wore the same armor and a weird mustache. They did not look fearful like he expected them to. The members of the Oath Guard looked confused in his general direction. All but 2, who were chanting something. He was a little disappointed to not see their faces struck with fear, but it didn't matter to the attacker. They were just savage little sheep he had to slaughter. Determined expressions appeared among the members of the Oath Guard as they got in battle formation. 2 warriors with shields and swords in the front, a spear wielder in the middle, and the 2 mumbling people in the back. Their futile struggle amused him. They still thought they had a chance despite seeing how easily he dispatched their leader. A grin twisted his face as he lifted his spear again and circulated his chi to use his tiger cloud step once again. He charged forward, faster than any of them could possibly react, his spear aiming for the gaps in their armor. Just when he was about to pierce the shield wearer's throat, a weird, segmented barrier made up of transparent hexagons appeared, blocking his attack. The spear tip glanced off, unable to stop his charge. He crashed into the barrier, shattering the weird daist magic. Tisk, how embarrassing, he thought to himself. The impact had no effect on his tempered body, but it was embarrassing nonetheless. However, now their flimsy protection was gone. He looked forward to their shocked faces when he felt a searing pain pierce his kidney. These barbarians! How could a fellow man aim for his kidney? Covered in a golden glow, the team leader stood behind him. The wound in his chest was closing at a visible rate. I guess we got a little complacent since you bastards were unable to injure us previously, he muttered, seeing that his surprise attack had worked. The cultivator growled enraged as he swung his spear to wipe away this man. However, his move was stopped mid-swing because he had to block the sword of the shield wearer. At some point, he was surrounded by the team leader, the spear wielder, and the shield wearer. He had lost the initiative and was forced to face their coordinated attacks. How could he, a warrior at the peak of foundation building, possibly be cornered by a bunch of savages? The 2 shield wearers had already gotten too close to use his long spear effectively, and the opposing spear kept aiming at his openings. He finally couldn't take it anymore and used aerial ascend to take this battle to the sky. How very embarrassing that he was forced to flee to the sky. Pissed, he decided to show these people what it meant to offend him. Ripping off the stuffy cloak those stinky natives gave him, he revealed himself in all his glory. "Savor the last moments of your life," he cried out and gathered chi for the palm of the ancient. He would squash the whole group in one move. Still not accepting their fate, a group of ice spears was shot from the chanting one among them, but they were easily dodged. The next moment a tremendous palm force descended on the team of the Oath Guard. The ground around them slightly sank as they were crushed onto the street. Their armors couldn't stop their bones from breaking under the weight. "Kukuku, ha 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 ha," the cultivator in the sky laughed at the sight. Although they were still breathing, watching them crawl and squirm like maggots warmed his heart and relieved him of the frustration. "You dare!" a mighty, high-pitched voice echoed through the valleys of glass towers. An overbearing royal aura bore down on him, as an overwhelming force suddenly hit the back of his head. He fell from the sky like a shooting star and turned a pedestrian cobble street into a crater. Fortunately, it was empty as the citizens had long fled when the fight broke out. He had a hard time thinking. His brain was throbbing, his skull probably fractured. He laboriously pulled himself out of the crater and looked up at the figure that had suddenly attacked him. Despite her small stature, she had a regal aura, like a king or even an emperor. "What?" he tried to speak, but despite her regal aura she unceremoniously started thrashing him. Fists as small as raindrops, but as piercing as metal wind showered his whole body. His finely tempered skeleton was broken apart with surgical precision, and he could do nothing. Even as the little being kept clobbering, her majestic aura only kept increasing, making him unwilling to resist. Not that he had a chance of resisting, to begin with. Maybe it was just the severe brain damage he suffered from the first attack that made him hallucinate. However, these thoughts could not liberate him from the pain. "Finn! Keep him alive! We already secured the newbies." Lixis cautioned her as she ran over. "Don't worry, he is still breathing. I just broke his bones and his den thingamajig," the fairy answered after she channeled all her anger into the cultivator's body in the shape of pure violence. "Good, I will call some people to transport him away." "Where are we taking him? Why do you ask?" "In case I have to let off some more steam." "Oh. We are taking him to Alzalsar." Lixis answered readily. Seth was tapping with his finger on the tabletop. The blacksmith was not amused. Seth, Hone, and Whedon had just finished refining the pieces of materials for the helmet and boots when a messenger informed him of what happened. All lords of Minas Mar were assembled in the meeting room to discuss what had happened. Finn and the members of the Oath Guard in question recounted the event. They had already been healed enough to act normally, but they had still taken a tremendous beating. "All of you know what this means, right?" Up to now, the person behind the events in Delta had been satisfied with indirectly framing them. Suddenly, they had brought in a cultivator that could actually deal damage to the members of the Oath Guard. Even when they were just the newer ones that had yet to even reach Level 70. "Someone tattled on us." Monique voiced what everyone was thinking. Though maybe not in that exact wording. The chance that their change in behavior was triggered by Minas Mar taking action was high. The only way they could have found out was if someone informed them. "I don't think it's any of our people. I also doubt it's one of the Adventurer Guild." Mary gave her opinion. "That only leaves the investors and political partners." Jane summed up what Mary implied. "On that note, I may have a way to lower their involvement." Seth threw in the room. Originally, he didn't think of giving the investors the boot, but seeing how there may be some with connection to the enemy, it might be a good chance to cut ties. Everyone looked at him when he shared what he talked about with Karina. "Even if things work out with Karina, I still don't think it's a good idea to just kick out the investors because of some suspicions. We should investigate first and find those we can trust and pull them into our boat," Jane reasoned. Seth knew that it wasn't a good idea to just go back on their words and cut ties, and he had not planned to do it rigorously. Since Jane suggested solving their problem, it was decided for her to take care of it. Jane's face darkened as she realized that she had been had. Nobody thought it was a good idea to offend their would-be investors. But now, as the first one to step forward with a solution, she had burdened herself with a ton of additional work. "If you need people or connection, try sending someone to a person named Chard in the Demon's Shade district. Maybe he can help you," Seth suggested, remembering his recently made contact with the demonic information broker. "Fine." Chapter 592. To protect. Seeing that the situation in Delta was turning, Seth wanted to finish his armor as quickly as possible. But he couldn't get hasty. He was already very fast, taking into account that he was working on a legendary armor set. He wanted to quickly return to the workshop, however, he stayed in the meeting room and they kept talking. It had been a while for all of them to meet like this and it felt good to simply talk. Not all of it was important stuff. At some point, Link brought out food and it became a meal with everyone. Even when the world was currently in chaos and maybe even on the brink of destruction, for Seth things had actually turned for the better. The last time he had this kind of kinship, it had been a while. The armor was for himself, but this was what he fought for. He just wanted to protect his little piece of the world. He realized that he couldn't just concentrate on the armor. If the black faction behind the Berserk Pellet already started sending cultivators to help their associates, the member of the Oath Guard were in danger. He didn't know most members of the Oath Guard personally, but all of them were chosen by him and the people he trusted. Most importantly, they were also here to protect what was important to him. They were part of it, his people. He thought that Myanmar may have been big enough now, to weather the storms of the world. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was time to go a little further. There was a cabinet with his name on it. After the meeting/get-together, Seth approached Mary alone. "Seth, what can I do for you?" she asked with a slightly drunk slur. "I need 500 gold from the guild funds," he said straight away. "Why, you are planning something crazy, right? Don't you have your personal funds for this kind of stuff?" she asked confusedly. So far Seth had never touched the guild funds to buy materials for his own projects. It was a first that he directly asked for such a huge sum of money. "Yeah, it's probably crazy, but it's for Myanmar," he assured her. "You don't have to justify yourself. You can take it whenever you like, but thanks for the heads up. I will write it down later," she said after slightly sobering up. "Thanks, I will take it tomorrow." He spent the evening with Mina before going to sleep. The next morning after breakfast, he got the money, bringing the gold in his system wallet to almost 1,000. With this much money, he was sure it would suffice for what he intended to do. But it wasn't time yet. The Soul Emporium only opened in the evening. He returned to the workshop. He wanted to finish his helmet until evening. The helmet he had designed was inspired by the Helm of Darkness, but the cheek guards were pulled back to reveal the face, making it look more like a nasal helmet with a nose guard from the front. Although the very enclosed helmets gave better protection, Seth didn't like the way they restricted his sight and voice. Since he was also going to cast magic and sing, he couldn't have that. It was a trade-off between more protected area and utility. When making the helmet, Seth was especially happy that his skills allowed him to work the metal like in a modern workshop. When working with metal, his pyrokinesis allowed him to use flames like a plasma cutter or a gas torch depending on the circumstance. In the case of the mix of this composite material, he managed to create a similar effect using his energy manipulation 3 and Karen's obel, although it took a huge amount of mana to soften the legendary material and even more to weld it. Compared to other armor parts, the helmet especially needed him to switch back and forth between different attachments to shape the material, and he had to keep it malleable the whole time while singing the forging ballad. It was a very resource-intensive labor. After shaping and welding the pieces of the helmet together, he refined them, cut them to shape, and beveled the edges. The last step was forging and adding the nasal guard, similar to how it would be done on what the system called a Norman nasal helmet. His clothes were drenched in sweat when he finally finished the helmet. As he had expected, it had already become evening. He returned to his quarters for a quick shower and a change of clothes. He took a rueful glance at the mirror. The blacksmith could now comprehend Jonah's anguish. Ever since the goddess Eos had turned his beard to dust, it had not grown back. His cheeks were as bare as a woman's or those of a young lad. Fortunately, Seth had never cared about his appearance too much, so losing the beard before he got any deep attachments to it, was only a minor inconvenience. Although it scratched a little on his image of a blacksmith. Big, muscular, and bearded. He had the height, and defined muscles to show, but now his beard was gone. However, he coped by looking at it from another perspective. A smooth youthful face fit the description of a bard better, despite bard being only one letter away from beard. He pulled himself out of these useless thoughts and hurried to the demon district. It wasn't like he didn't visit the other soul traders Chard had mentioned, however, they all seemed sketchy when compared to Tunomol. If Seth wanted souls that were gained by unfair contracts, murder, or other kinds of forceful acquisition, he could do it himself. This was why he made the conscious decision to stay with the Soul Emporium, and he had yet to regret it. The blacksmith had already been to Tunomol's Soul Emporium a few times to get the souls needed for his armor. This time he was aiming for something else. It had been a crazy idea, just a fleeting thought in the back of his mind ever since he had first visited. Still, after realizing how fragile life could be, even when he covered people in high-grade armor, he decided to give it a try. "Seth, you are back. How can I help you this time?" the demon greeted him. "I came to give your special cabinet a try." The goat's face turned serious. "You remember that you can only buy what agrees to be bought and it won't be cheap," he cautioned. "I know," Seth answered seriously, ignoring the stupid pun the demon made. Blacksmith and demon went up the stair to the second floor. The blacksmith stayed in the Soul Emporium for a long time, almost the whole night. But he deemed it necessary. He only left in the early morning after exhausting all his money and skills. Both the bard and goat seemed quite satisfied with the results of a night's work. Seth was completely exhausted. All he wanted was to get home and to bed. Despite his exhaustion, he was very satisfied. Tomorrow he would finish the helmet and start the new project on the side. The Golem Forge would have a lot to do, once he finished the new blueprint. "I'm in a good mood right now, so skedaddle if you treasure your lives," the blacksmith suddenly said to the darkness. He had detected the presence of two pursuers with the life detection from his ear ring. "I'm afraid we can't do that." Tower Master of Minas March. Disgruntled, Seth looked in the dark alleyway, but couldn't see the two figures he was detecting. "Now you weirdos even target my life? Aren't you going a little overboard?" the blacksmith asked unimpressed. He didn't get an answer, as the two figures rushed at him. In the same instant, Seth had already equipped his gear. Several dings could be heard as weapons crashed into the barrier that was created with Shield Warrior's constitution by equipping the Wyvern Shield. At the same time, he heard two gasps and blood splattered on the street. They had been hit by a fourth of their own attack thanks to Tisiphone's mirror. "Well, you had the chance to walk away. Don't blame me." "Ugh. Arg." A wave of orange fire filled the street and alley, revealing the two figures as holes in the fire. The blacksmith took a deep breath and absorbed back the fire that had burned for mere seconds. Old posters on the wall, garbage, anything easily flammable in the street had vanished, eaten away by the salamander's flames. By absorbing it, he had slightly replenished his mana. "Goodbye." A concentrated dark red flame swallowed the two figures. Chapter 593. L'Roig. Seth was too tired and failed to control his strength. He had underestimated the power of the draconic titan fire. The two figures, which were shortly visible when taking the brunt of the attack, were reduced to charred corpses before his eyes. Whoops! Maybe he had overestimated them after they took the salamander fire and were just fine. Now he was unable to harvest their soul. He could only do with what they dropped naturally, which was nothing. He was too tired to really care and just wanted to get home. Unsure what to do with the bodies, he simply threw the soul fire at them, letting it take care of the cleanup. This attack had only strengthened his decision, that he had to do a little more. He didn't know whether these two were cultivators or fellow locals that worked with them, but he knew that a normal oath guard would have most likely died in this attack. On the other hand, he was also a little excited about how well his new armor had worked. They might have been able to run away if it wasn't for Tisiphone's mirror. He returned to Minas Mar and fell asleep the moment he touched the bed. In the morning he informed Mary and the others about the assassination attempt. It wasn't that it had any impact on him, but he cautioned them. The enemy seemed to know quite a bit. It was possible they would start aiming for them individually. They made sure to distribute the message to all members of Minas March. Only after communicating this did Seth return to the workshop. He wanted to finish his helmet before he put some time into his new project. For the enchantment, he chose another poem of Phoenix, the demon known for his singing and poetry. This time he aimed for Apollo's aspect of singing. He simply saw it fitting to put that on his helmet. He etched the poem in a single line along the crown of the helmet where it glowed in a dim silver light. It was a short poem with only one verse, that praised the demon's angelic voice. This left enough space for another two enchantments. The ones he chose were the advanced formations of willpower and intelligence he placed on the drawn-back cheek guards. With the enchantments done, the only thing left was to insert the liners he had Nico Booz prepare beforehand. After making sure that everything sat well, he judged the helmet to be finished. It was time to move on to the soul forging. The blacksmith had to drive a hard bargain on this one since Tunomol initially wanted a whopping 50 gold for it. This was Soul of the Sea Witch, massive, epic, crafting materials. The soul of an old mermaid well versed in evil sea shanties, that have drawn many sailors to their demise. A creature with the upper body of an old hag and the lower body of an eel. What even were evil sea shanties? But it was definitely a creature versed in singing. Seth had to admit that shaping the soul into a helmet was a lot easier than making a real helmet. Once the sea witch's soul was the spitting image of the finished helmet, Seth began with the Olympian enchantment. His face turned serious and concentrated as he began. The calm presence in his back, looking over his shoulders this time was Lethe, the goddess of the river of oblivion. The waters of her river helped souls forget about their previous life, so they could go on to be reborn, or enter the afterlife without any burdens. Now, Seth was not keen on losing his memory, so he took this enchantment very seriously. The presence behind him was cool, like a pleasant breeze on a warm summer day. The sigil were 4 water lines in a circle, depicting a river. It was very simple, but maybe it was because it fit the very existence of Lethe. Once one had lost all their memories, what was left was the very core of their being, just like the sigil, only showing the bare minimum to symbolize what it meant to symbolize. The blacksmith imagined the presence behind him smiling, just a little bit, but he could have been wrong. He placed the engraving on the crown of the soul helmet. When he finished the engraving, nothing happened. He could feel that it was finished and the blessing had been granted, but the engraving did not grow like the others. It stayed the simple circle with the 4 wavy lines symbolizing a river. Maybe his assumption was still right, in the end. He proceeded to fuse the soul into the helmet and dunk it into the waters of Styx. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Heroic. Legendary. Scorpio set 1/X. Physical DEF 2500. Mag, Def 2800. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 plus 50 willpower. 9 plus 50 intelligence. 10 passive skill, Serenade of Phoenix. 11 passive skill, Patronage of Apollo. 12 passive skill, Mermaid's Song. 13 passive skill, Blessing of Lethe. 14 active skill, Voice Projection. Scorpio set effect, to be updated. 9th part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. A helmet to make any bard jealous. Requirements: Seth Smith. The passive skills had easy to understand effects. Passive skill, Serenade of Phoenix, no cost. The range of your song is improved by 3 times. Passive skill, Patronage of Apollo, no cost. The effects of music in combat are improved by 150%. Passive skill, Mermaid's Song, no cost. Your voice has an enrapturing effect, able to send weaker listeners into a trance. Triple the effect on sailors and sea folk. The real gain was the Blessing of Lethe. Passive skill, Blessing of Lethe, no costs. The user gains immunity to effects that affect the mind or memory. Your mental power is doubled. This took away one of Seth's biggest fears, which were strong mind-controlling effects or similar skills that could manipulate him. Because of his years of reading, he had an especially high distaste for these kinds of effects, that could make allies fight each other. The bard was not afraid of a situation where his allies were manipulated, as he was confident that his own skills could offset these kinds of tricks. However, what could the others do, if he were to fall? Lastly was the active skill Voice Projection. It allowed Seth to manipulate where his voice was perceived from, within a range of 30 meters. It seemed like an interesting skill if he managed to connect it with the illusion skills his belt granted him. After finishing Heroic, another name he didn't know where the system took them, he equipped all the pieces he had finished so far and tested their fit. Standing in front of the mirror, his heart rate rose. Looking like a dark knight, with a sleek demonic aura, he couldn't help to feel a little excited. One would always feel excited about getting something new, but this was something he created himself. That made it even better. After marveling at himself and striking poses in the mirror for close to half an hour, he pulled himself together. The day was still young and he wanted to start on something else. The blacksmith spent the rest of the day working out the blueprint for his maybe most impactful project. Chapter 594. Paprima. There were just 2 more armor pieces left and he had finished the blueprints for the next iteration of the fair. Today, while he and the dwarfs were working on refining the last of the materials, the golem forge was working furiously. It wasn't the only thing running in the background. Besides Cerberus, who was tirelessly working on weapons, they could also hear construction work from a new door they had not seen before. After they refined the last bits of dragon scales into the composite material, the 3 sat together with their water bottles. What a truly amazing machine! Hone kept gushing over the golem forge that was still speedily working to the side, looking like a highly complex assembly robot. I find it a little creepy, to be honest. Whedon couldn't help looking at the crafting station with suspicion. This was a good example of the cultural difference between dwarfs of different worlds. Hone grew up with foundries and arcane casting technologies. He appreciated the technological development the golem forge represented. The younger dwarf, on the other hand, came from a more traditional world where the work of a true craftsman was more glorified, to the point that this kind of technology was shunned and had a hard time developing. However, Seth had to agree with Whedon. With the quick movements of dozens of mechanical arms, that glinted with an eerie silver sheen in the greenish-blue hue that emitted from the depths of the machine, the apparatus looked like the creation of a mad scientist from a horror movie. They talked for a while longer, but neither asked what Seth was building again. Soon the dwarfs went back to their quarters and left Seth to his own devices. He could start on the boots. This time he was cheating a little on the boots, as he had left making a fine pair of knee-high epic leather boots to Nico Booze. The leather used for the boots was that of a white bull, this time one that was not cursed. The materials had easily cost 50 gold. He was aiming for Apollo's aspect of purity, but this was a hard one since purity was not really a thing for most demons. This was why Seth tried to trigger it with the material used. The boots of the white bull came with the passive option to purify curses over time. In addition, there was earth affinity that fit well with the scorpion material and the blessing of the land, which would lower his stamina consumption and health regeneration when standing with both feet on earth. Using the boots as a base, he attached the armor plates to the high boots, in a way that fit with the knee joints of the cuisses, making greaves unnecessary. After attacking them, he added the enchantments he had planned to the armor plates. Since he couldn't find a fitting etching, Seth did not even try to keep the aspect of Apollo in mind when it came to the enchantment. The poem he had found praised the demon Seer, known for his quick travel power and benign nature. Seer's travel was a movement skill similar to a charge, that came close to blink or short-range teleportation, according to its description. Aside from the demonic enchantment, he also chose the Shattering Stomp. This enchantment was similar to the skill of his disruptive boots, which could send out a damaging shockwave, either as an attack or as a makeshift charge. The theme was quite obvious. Since all armor pieces gave him boosts to speed, Seth dumped all kinds of charge skills onto the boots. Among others, he prepared the Olympian enchantment Electo's Rush for the soul enchantment. This would give him a wealth of options to truly make use of the increased speed in battles. Although he would need the training to use them in tandem with Lame One's Walk. Even if he didn't train them for battle, they would be great for running away or getting distance. It didn't take long to finish the demonic etching. Seer was a very benign demon and his blessing came with no strings attached, except the souls Seth paid. The inlays of Shattering Stomp he added to the armor plate at the heel took a little longer because of the steps involved. After finishing the item he took a short break, ate something, and checked on the golem forge. It was currently busy building frames according to the blueprints he had finished yesterday. For the first test, there were only 10 for now. 5 of them used Olympian silver, and the other 5 used Ithilden as the base component. The other day Seth had bought out almost 300 souls from Tanomol. All of them had an ego and agreed to follow Minasmar and Seth based on individual terms fixed in soul contracts, which would secure their loyalty. Now, all of these souls were quite different. Some were former knights or soldiers. Others were mages, witches, or other professions that had little to do with the battlefield. To accommodate most of them, Seth had to make adjustments. In the case of material, he used Ithilden for the bodies of classes specialized in magic and Olympian silver for the more physical professions. The reason was obvious. The former had a better magic conductivity, while the latter had a greater balance and offered a higher durability. The differences did not end with their classes but also depended on their size. The blacksmith knew that depending on their power, massive and above souls had a chance to manifest a true body for short times even if he did not help in the creation of that option. Examples were Alzalsar, Ceres, or the fire titan of the Trignus gloves. However, smaller souls lacked this power. Now he had two options. In the case of the Faer, he had used external power sources to help with the formation of the body. He chose a more refined method with a similar principle this time. This first iteration were frames made for the small and medium-sized souls among the batch. They would use the core technology similar to Alzalsar. These were also easier to manufacture, which was why he started with them. He just had to create a blueprint for the frame with the specific interfaces he would need to later insert the core and proceed with the soul music in the room that was currently under construction. Using the tower's maintenance drones, Seth was adding another room to his workshop. The blacksmith had come up with a static formation that would ease the creation of Faer. With this formation, he would just need to insert magic crystals and sing his music to facilitate the recreation of a fleshly body atop the metal frames. It wasn't as handy or mobile, but a lot more efficient. For the bigger souls, he planned on getting more involved himself. Instead of the core blueprint, he was going to infuse the souls directly into the material, similar to how he did it with Ceres. This would lead to a closer attachment between body and soul, but also take more time. He would start working on them once he finished his armor. Once he had checked the golem forge and the progress of construction of the formation, he returned to the boots. For the boots, he had obtained the soul of a creature called the Rabbit of Kerbanog. According to the goat, it was a great beast feared for its quick and devastating attacks, a beast so vile it could only be ended by a holy artifact. Although the soul was epic, it was only big because of the damage done by said artifact. Seth also saw no possibility to repair it, he could only increase its size and refine it to assure its efficacy. From this mighty soul, he forged the soul boots and engraved them with the sigil of Alecto's rush. Her name meant something along the lines of the implacable or unceasing anger. Judging by the name, Seth came to the conclusion that this was something like a charge attack. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between skills has unlocked a new option. The notification sounded after the blacksmith infused the soul armaments and finished the boots in the waters of Styx. Paprima. Legendary. Scorpio set 1/X. Papyrima set 1/2. Physical DEF 2400. Mag, Def 2400. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 plus 50% earth affinity. 9 passive skill, purity of the white bull. 10 passive skill, blessing of the land. 11 active skill shattering stomp. 12 active skill, Apollo's bless. Papyrima set effect. Passive skill, 3D maneuver assistance. Passive skill, Alecto's rush. Active skill, Scorpio star escape leave 1. Scorpio set effect, to be updated. 11th part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. One of a pair of boots that grant a great deal of maneuverability, but are crippled without the rest of the set. Requirements, Seth Smith. Chapter 595. Scorpio Escape. Looking at the description of the pair of boots, it was the first time during this build that something unforeseen had happened. Seer's travel had vanished. Other skills he expected, like the shattering stomp, were there, but the demon's movement skill had vanished. The leather's option to purify curses over time had also evolved into Apollo Bless. This skill could purify any curse once a day and grant immunity to status effects for 5 hours. However, when he checked the set effects, he started to realize where the demon's power had vanished gone to. Active skill, Scorpio star escape leave 1 mana cost, 250, cool down, 20 seconds. Short range teleport to a location set within the constellation Scorpio. A skill that gave him actual short range teleportation, though with some restrictions. What was more baffling was the fact that it had a level, which meant that he could collect proficiency and improve the skill by leveling it. Since he couldn't understand the restrictions based on the description, he equipped the pair of boots and quickly stumbled before he could even test the skill. The moment he put them on, a convoluted overlay appeared in his field of vision. A stream of knowledge flowed into his brain, helping him understand what he was seeing. This was 3D maneuver assistance. Was this the skill of the Rabbit of Kurbanog? The overlay constantly showed him surfaces in the three-dimensional room he could reach with his current agility and use to propel himself and attack from various angles. Passive skill, 3D maneuver assistance, no cost, no cooldown. Assists in 3D maneuvers. During 3D maneuvers 30% of your agility attribute will also add to your attack damage as if it were strength. As 3D maneuvers counted any attacks he performed in the air. It was quite funny that he had a skill that boosted his stamina and health regeneration when he stood firmly on the ground and another that improved his attack power when he did not. The blacksmith was momentarily distracted by the sudden overlay, but he quickly remembered the original reason he wore the boots. He activated Scorpio Star Escape. The sight that followed made him instantly realize the origin of the weird names the system had given the set pieces. As if drawn on the floor of his workshop appeared a constellation, the Scorpio constellation as it had been visible during ancient times, he suspected. He stood on a glowing spot called Pipirima. Maybe 2 or 3 meters in front of him, he saw a great outpoint called Laraeg. Even further in the front, he saw Alniyat twice and Graphias slightly to the right beyond the wall of his workshop. A little behind him and slightly to the left were Shala and Lisith. All the names of the items he had finished so far. Following an idea, he put all the armor pieces on and he found the points only lit up when he equipped the item with the according name. He could help but test it. Since some of the points were not within the room, he chose the closest one, Laraeg, to teleport to. For a moment he lost his vision, before appearing 3 meters ahead of the place he stood before. He felt dizzy and a little sore with a slight headache. This was definitely something he had to get used to. Other than these side effects, he was stoked. He actually gained a version of Blink. He turned around and tried it again. The drawing of the constellation oriented itself with him, the tail of the scorpion was always behind him, and the claws at the front. Although it was quite costly with 250 mana per use, it was not too expensive for a skill like this. He also understood why the description said, that the boots were technically useless without the rest of the armor. They were a requirement to unlock more teleportation destinations. After playing around with the new boots for a moment, he also checked Electo's Rush, which was surprisingly a passive skill. It improved the power of all charge attacks by half and decreased the stamina expenditure by the same amount. Although Seth only had Shattering Stomp as a bona fide charging skill. Maybe it also had an effect on attacks with 3D maneuver assistance? Using the overlay he started running at a wall to the right, jumped at the wall, used the wall to propel himself towards the ceiling, and finally used the ceiling as a foothold to attack the air in the place he had stood before. Seth would have never thought that he would be able to do such a thing. He could only blame the additional 275 agility the armor pieces granted him. Why did he do this? His thought was simple, now he would take off the boots and do the same movements again, to see if it would exhaust him more. The blacksmith charged at the wall, and jumped at it trying to hit the exact same spot. He stepped at the wall, his foot slipped, and he propelled himself face first back on the ground. Fortunately, he had worn the rest of the armor, or else he might have really hurt himself. He slowly picked himself up from the floor. He was just glad nobody saw that. One thing was clear, without 3D maneuver assistance he could forget about these kinds of stunts. What if he tried it again, using the lame one's walk? The bard was quite clear, that this would work either. It was painfully obvious that he had no talent for this kind of fighting style, without the given assistance. He still remembered his fight in the Beyond. If the footholds he created had not literally done their best to appear where he stepped, he would have taken more damage from the falls, than his enemy. Seeing that it was a fruitless endeavor, he gave up on trying to test whether Electo's Rush influenced 3D maneuver assistance. When he sat down to take a break, he finally realized how far he had come. He wore a full set of legendary armor. He was almost finished with his biggest personal project. Checking his skills, he found that blacksmith and enchantment had really come a long way. He looked forward to how it all came together once he finished the last piece. The only thing missing now was the shield. But he wouldn't do it today. The materials were already refined, all that was left for tomorrow was forging the actual shield. And once his personal safety was finished, he could throw himself into working on the safety of his friends and subordinates. With a warm sense of accomplishment, he fell on the bed beside Mina and fell asleep. Somewhere in Delta. After 2 knocks, a man wearing a tailor-made suit entered an office. "We are unable to get in contact with the Bohr brothers since yesterday," he reported to the man sitting at the desk. Tisk. They keep acting high and mighty, but when push comes to shove they end up vanishing or being captured. The boss struck a deal with those weirdos, but so far only their drugs are up to par. They had been spreading drugs, kidnapping people, and even organized the killing of the guard. Everything those weirdos wanted, they had accomplished flawlessly. The huge meal just waited for the last push. But what did they do? Any time they asked them for some support, those arrogant pricks simply failed time and time again. If it wasn't for their drugs and materials, he was sure the boss would have never struck a deal with them. Nothing we can do about it. Just report it to them as is. We send them to find and kill core members of Myanmar, but they didn't return. Why did these people have to be so tough? If it wasn't for their deal with foreigners. He was tired of dealing with these people, but he couldn't deny that they were strong. They had terrifying and exotic means to make people obedient. They had to hurry. If only those useless researchers would finally bring in results. Any news from Gamma? It seems like the serum will soon be finished. Our people are preparing for them the moment it's finished. Great, at least some good news. You can leave now. He waves his hand, but the shadow didn't leave. What else? He asked when he saw his subordinate not leaving. Our contacts in the government have fallen silent, he reported. What? District managers Din and Allen are not reacting to our messages anymore after they send the information on a secret meeting concerning pitch for a top-secret project. What project? According to their last contact, it was called Project Ego. Chapter 596. Somewhere else, 17. Voracious Cloud Continent. In a dark throne room filled with swathes of miasma, sat a handsome man on a demonic throne. His dark charm would weaken the hearts of men and women alike. He was taking a sip of wine from a golden chalice when a figure in dark robes appeared kneeling in front of his throne. Any news? Reporting. The life lanterns of the Boer brothers have been extinguished. The scene was unable to give any information about their whereabouts. The demonic man frowned. This world is just too weird. Not just Foundation stage experts, even Golden Core experts just vanish without a trace at times. The wild is full of beasts and the settlements are chaotic like an ant's nest, he lamented. How much I despise having to work with local powers. But if we moved openly, the Alliance will get wind of it. We can't let them find out before we took roots over there. If the big clans and sects started to move, there wouldn't even be a morsel left for them. It was their good fortune that the knowledge of this new world was not public yet and the big factions were still hesitating to take the first step. A malicious smile decorated his face as he kept thinking. As long as they could secretly set up their foundation before anyone else, he could raise to new heights and his sect wouldn't need to be afraid of any faction anymore. Send some more outer disciples to keep an eye on those locals and have them set up hideouts. I think it's time to prepare to cut ties with the scene. You know what to do. In a decade or two they would be able to dominate in the new territories. Yes, my liege. Ugh, the elder of the Northern Edge sect was thrown to the stone floor. You really found him, brother? A man who had been sitting cross-legged in the cave said in slight surprise. He had been cultivating up to now but stood up when he saw his sworn brother enter the cave, following the bundled-up elder. I had to redeem a little favor, but it wasn't hard. Master Mountain downplayed his deal with Mina's march. How did you old codgers even find this place? The squirming captive on the ground exclaimed when he realized where he was brought. Other may not have recognized, but these were the secret training grounds of the Northern Edge sect's shadow guards. How could I not find this place after you kidnapped my daughter-in-law's cousin and brought him here? Did you think the heavens are blind and your Northern Edge sect could get away with everything? Although he had spoken quite calmly, a tremendous force was building and pressing down on the helpless elder on the ground. Brother, hold back your anger. His cultivation has already been crippled some time ago and he didn't have a comfortable life in the foreign lands. I had to feed him various pills on the way, just to help him regain his consciousness, Master Mountain warned his friend. They still needed the man to enter and open the secret passage. At Yu's warning, his old friend reined in his spiritual pressure. You are right, he said with a forceful sigh. They still needed the old cripple to open the entrance. Kukyuku ha ha ha. You think I would help you and betray my sect? I may have lost my cultivation base and some of my mind, but this will never herb. Something had shot into his mouth, clogged his throat, and travelled right down to his stomach. What did you make me swallow? He pressed out under heavy coughs. Don't blame me for being ruthless. It was the tail of the striped yin-yang skink. It turns you into a simple appendage of the reptile. As long as I control it, you will do what I tell you, the old man explained solemnly. You had a striped yin-yang skink. Master Mountains exclaimed surprised. This creature was extremely rare and highly sought after. Although it was a technique that did not work on people with a high cultivation base, it gave almost absolute control over those without any cultivation base at all. I had to exchange it for my 100-year-old snow ginseng in preparation for today, his friend answered with a dark face. You really paid dearly. Anything for the family. The elder of the Northern Edge sect had fallen silent during their short dialogue. The skink tail had taken effect, turning him into a puppet. They released the binding on the elder and he stood up. Now, open the entrance, the old man ordered. The elder cut his finger and drew a complicated symbol on the cave wall in the back. The seemingly seamless rock started vibrating and slowly parted at a clean line. Beyond the stone entrance was a clean regal hallway. Finely carved walls and even a floor of polished sandalwood. Let's go. Yeah, let us. The two old men slowly entered the hidden base of the Northern Edge sect, and the puppet followed at some distance. The two old men were ready to stretch their old bones and wreak some havoc. Earth, close to Epsilon in the far east dash. A dirty hand broke through the volcanic ashes. The monk's dirty face surfaced from the searing ashes. His robes were blackened and burned, but the man himself was unhurt by the burning emissions. Looking around, the green plain he had wandered before has turned into a wasteland of destruction. What land had that demon led him to? Monsters and flood dragons are everywhere. Even the earth itself was in unrest, spewing fire and ashes. Lava streams were flowing from the mountains that had seemed so calm mere hours ago. It was hard to see through the dust clouds that still hung in the air, the residues of the devastating pyroclastic cloud that had swept over him not long ago. After losing the demon's traces he had wandered these foreign lands, looking for a way back to his monastery. But he could no longer find where this world and the voracious cloud continent were connected with each other. All this place had to offer were weird fruits and scaly fiends. The monk was close to breaking his oath and eating the tough meat of these beasts. To make matters worse, a mountain had suddenly erupted not far from him. He wandered through the desert of hot ashes. All flora and fauna had vanished, the landscape was completely changed. Although he wished to don a new set of robes, he resisted the urge as they would burn up and be ruined just the same as his current ones. Resisting the heat with his Buddha body was possible, but his clothes would not be spared. The monk was wandering aimlessly, trying to find a way out of the dust cloud, when he heard the splashing of thick liquid. When he turned around his eyes fell on a bright shining warrior in a sinister armor. Bright yellow and orange light escaped between armor plates that looked like the darkness itself. Orange lava still dropped from his body as he stepped out of the stream, leaving smoldering footprints as he walked. In his hand he held a crude-looking axe that seemed to have formed from solidified magma, also dripping orange, molten rock from its honed edge. Although the monk couldn't make out any eyes from the brightly glowing holes in the helmet, he could feel the creature's gaze on him. Unsure how to react, he tried to greet the creature. Ami. But his greeting was rudely interrupted by the axe swinging at his head. He could only dodge in a hurry, feeling his scalp being cooked despite dodging and possessing greatly tempered flesh. He looked warily at the creature that had suddenly appeared. This wasn't going to be easy. His face fell as more armored beasts emerged from the lava flow behind his opponent. This didn't look good. Chapter 597. Legendary Set. The cracking of knuckles echoed in the workshop. The time had come to finish maybe the work of his lifetime. The last piece of the set that would round off everything. A shield made of what could be called some of the strongest defensive materials. Seth soon started groaning. 1.5 of the 7 dragon scales were used on the materials for the shield. The difference in the ratio became immediately clear when he tried to forge the metal plates alone. The blacksmith had not expected such a huge difference, since he had not felt any problems previously. He had used 2 of the scales on the cuirass, but it was also more material overall. The blacksmith didn't plan to make a huge shield. Since the rest of his body was already covered in almost invincible armor and he preferred maneuverability because of his class combination, he decided to make a sizable buckler shield. He had already made this decision before the skills of the cuirass and boots became clear. The puzzle pieces simply fell into place, because of his overall preferences. The smaller size meant the concentration of dragon material in the shield was higher than in the rest of his armor. Obviously, the blacksmith also hoped that he would get a stronger effect, with the higher concentration. It also meant he needed to put in even more effort and mana to make the tough material move into the shape he wanted. all the while carefully controlling his breathing so he wouldn't mess up the forging ballad. Tirelessly, he swung Karen's obel to slowly but surely manipulate the shape of the big plate he had previously prepared with the dwarfs. He planned to make the whole shield from one piece of material. Using the same attachments he used for the helmet, he first worked out the boss, the dome of the buckler that would fit his fist. He had to work out the sphere, all the while keeping in mind not to work the material too thin. Once he made sure that it fit his hand, he transitioned to working on the rim. Naturally, he had not chosen to make a simple round buckler. The system had many blueprints of shields and bucklers. Seth had found one that has been immediately pleasing to his eye. It had an elongated diamond shape with curves and points at the rim, as if serrated. The lowest point was longer, turning into a semi-spike. Ridges gave the shield rigidity and reminded of webbed feet or dragon wings. Or a really feisty turtle. On top of all that, there was also a row of short spiked that were meant to catch blades when blocking with the shield. Especially these smaller spiked were a pain for Seth, as he had to make the individual and weld them to the surface of the shield. Making a hole and pinning the spike in place was an almost impossible effort, based on his mana. His method was also hard, but a lot more doable. With the shield in shape, he added a handle on the backside of the boss, so he could wield the shield with one hand. And then he took a break. It was already midday. He would only return to the workshop after a good meal. Sitting at the dining table, he realized the silence. Lately, the canteen had become a little emptier. Many of Delta's guilds and organizations were pulling out of the guard duty among the refugees. They had already lost too many members or were afraid to lose any, to care about their image. As the only ones not afraid of a sudden death by an invisible hand, more and more members of the Oath Guard joined the effort to protect and pacify the people. There were only a few days left before they would make their plan public and try to siphon away as many people as they could. No matter what the puppeteers planned, they were going to make things as hard as possible for them, and squeeze out some gains on the way. Things would slowly start moving once he finished the shield today. Karina had already informed him that she finished her preparations and was ready to show him. And there was another person he would have to meet before his speech on Friday, to make sure they got the script. Seth sighed. There was so much to do, even when he just wanted to enjoy a meal in quiet, his thoughts would rotate about the things to come. He simply couldn't enjoy his leisure, sometimes. All he wanted to do was stay in bed for a week, and he would definitely do so, once he was done. Even if the Age of Gods came and the world was embroiled in chaos, he was going to assimilate with his blanket and maybe watch movies or something. He finished his meal, stretched, and returned to the workshop. The physical form of the shield was finished, the next step was enchanting it. There was only one aspect of Apollo left. His most prominent one, the god of sunlight. Now that he looked at it, the shield also resembled a little sun or a star. Similar to purity, there were not many demons associated with light powers. However, there was one very prominent one, the bards called the Bearer of Insights. Or the Light Bearer. This demon was so ancient, that its true name was lost to time. At least the college didn't have any records of it. He had even asked some of the teachers, but nobody knew the true name. Well, true name or not, there was still a collection of work dedicated to the Bearer of Insights, that could grant powers associated with light. Seth chose the light property for the shield because he wanted to make up for the crowd control the Wyvern shield offered. The Bearer of Insights could give people insight into many things, even themselves. The light reflected by the item enchanted with the etching Seth chose, had the ability to show an opponent their greatest horrors. There were no costs attached to this etching. Because the bearer was so ancient, it was speculated that he lost his ego, making it possible to draw on his power for free. In exchange, the power of demons always came with a catch. The effect couldn't be used at will, but as stated, one had to either make the opponent look into the shield and see his own mirror image, or reflect light in their eyes using the shield. The boon was, that the enemy's level did not matter. No matter how strong they were, even transcended enemies would see their greatest fears and horrors. At that point, only the target's personality and willpower would make a difference. A mentally strong person might not be affected at all, someone weaker may become an idiot for life. He put in the effort to arrange the letters of the test in a pleasing way along the edge of the shield, only to find his efforts wasted. Once finished, the demonic power soaked into the shield, and the runes vanished. In exchange, the surface of the shield became a clear, reflective mirror polish. The originally dark reddish color was almost impossible to make out at this point. The shield was so reflective that it was almost like a chameleon effect. With this, Seth's hope of being able to use the demonic effect rose. Seeing this, Seth did not dare to engrave anything on the flawless surface. Fortunately, he didn't have to. The second enchantment he chose could also be engraved on the inside of the shield. It was an advanced version of size adjustment, the enchantment that could tailor armor to the wearer's size. This enchantment would allow Seth to grow the shield from the size of a buckler, to the size of a full-fledged shield that could cover most of his body. With the enchantments done, he started to work on the soul armament. Looking at the soul he had prepared, he could only think that it was a shame that he had been unable to find the soul of a creature with a light attribute. Just like demons have little to do with the light, few people go around slaughtering being of the light elemental as they are fundamentally good-natured. And those who did? Well, they were no friends of Tinamol. As such, the goat did not sell any souls of the light element. The blacksmith could have looked for one somewhere else, but he had to agree with the demon. There had to be a line somewhere. Instead, he chose the soul of a crystal turtle. A kind of reptile living in subterranean oceans. As the name suggested, it was a turtle that grew gemstones on its shield as a defense. It was pretty obvious why people would hunt and farm this creature. Going with the theme of light, the Olympian enchantment he chose was the blessing of Hyperion, the titan of the sun. This was a funny thing. While Apollo was the god of sunlight, Hyperion was the personification of the sun. This became especially clear when Seth started engraving the sigil of a stylized sun on top of the boss. Despite being a kin of fire, he could feel his back burning up in the heat of the presence watching him work. The sweat was pouring down his face and he didn't have the leisure to wipe it away. It was thanks to absolute focus that was granted by Forge Right, that he could keep working despite sweat constantly running in his eyes. When he finally finished the sigil, the soul buckler was covered in flame patterns, radiating from the shield boss, and it was infused with the power of Hyperion. Drenched from head to toe. With the sudden absence of the Sun Titan, Seth felt cold for the first time in his workshop. He took a moment to rest and get back his bearing before he infused the soul shield of the sun into the buckler he prepared and quenched the item in the waters of Styx to truly fuse them together. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between trait Olympian myths and the item has added a new option. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! You have finished a legendary set with a chance to become a myth. +5 to all attributes. Ding! You have created a magnum opus. +10 to all attributes. Your title, World's Best Blacksmith, has slightly improved. Ding! Title, Boneheaded, gained. You have more than 200 points in willpower. +2 universal attribute points. Ding! Title, Iron Plate, gained. You have more than 200 points in endurance +2 universal attribute points. Ding! Title, Fortune's Favored, gained. You have more than 100 points in luck. All luck-related multipliers are improved by 2%. Chapter 598. Antares. Seth was overwhelmed by the sudden flood of notifications. Legendary set with a chance to become a myth? Magnum opus? What was with these crazy rewards? Momentously, 2 of his attributes had shot past 200 and luck past 100, while his other attributes also weren't far off the mark. What are the luck-related multipliers? He exclaimed, distressed when rereading the effect of Fortune's Favored. He knew that luck played a role in a lot of things, and one of the reasons why he looked forward to this title was to see what the hidden stats of luck were. His expectations were in vain, but he was still happy. Even if he didn't know what exactly was improved, having his fortune improved couldn't be a bad thing. Aside from that, he had gained another 4 universal attribute points, making it 6 in total. Checking the change in his attributes, he found that his agility had reached 197, only missing 3 points to complete the 200. He still had 2 APS from the completion of the Trignus Cloves, which brought it to 199. For a moment he was very tempted to use a universal AP to bring it to 200, however, he resisted the temptation. The blacksmith decided on saving the universal ones for the future. Depending on the situation, he could use them to get a boost in whatever attribute he needed. If he used one on agility, he would only gain 1 UAP from the resulting title. Instead, he could just use a normal point from a level up to reach 200 and gain 2 UAPs. One of the notifications also mentioned the World's Best Blacksmith title. But when he checked it, he couldn't find any change. The slight disappointment helped him to finally tear away from his status window. He had been so absorbed by the sudden change and almost forgot about the most important part. Antares. Legendary. Scorpio set 1/12. Physical damage, 1200. Mag damage, 700. Physical DEF, 8000. Mag, Def, 7500. Durability, 6666. 180% damage negation. 2 complete weapon damage negation. 3 plus 35% spell damage. 4 plus 20% damage in the dark. 5 plus 25 agility. 6 plus 5% movement speed. 7 plus 40% damage reflection. 8 weapon break. 9 radiant refraction. 10 size change. 11 active skill, blinding light. 12 active skill, scorching light. 13 active skill, harrowing light. Scorpio set effect. 12/12. Movement speed is doubled when escaping. Protection of Apollo. Immune to light attribute damage. The power of light skills is doubled. All bardic skills are 75% more effective. Descendant of Gaia. 50% earth attribute damage negation. Earth attribute spells are 75% stronger. Demonic nature. All demonic skills are 75% more effective in combat. Demonic ballads and orations have a 25% higher chance to manipulate the listeners. Draconic disposition. Active skill, Dragon Roar. Active skill, Dragon Might. Your relationship with dragons is neutral. 12th part of a celestial set, planned and crafted by the gifted hands of craftsman Smith. Using divine and legendary materials, coupled with godly and demonic powers, he created a piece that is seeking its equal. Antares honors its name as an almost perfect defense and an artifice against war. Requirements: Seth Smith. Seth was speechless. Antares was great, but the armor overall had turned out even better than he had thought. Objectively, it was an absolute mess. Subjectively, it was perfectly in tune with the mess of skills Seth had gained over the past 2 years and was still training in. The set skills improved all the skills he was currently still learning and more. The armor alone improved his agility by a total of 300 and the set effect doubled his movement speed when escaping. In addition to his base attribute value, his belt and the soul armament, he had 684, almost 700 agility. Seth couldn't imagine any person to be able to catch up with him. Maybe a beast specialized in speed or teleportation, but not human. However, he had to calm himself. This was only true for escaping. Not everything was about attributes. Other classes had better multipliers for speed-based combat than he had as a blacksmith/bard. Piling up the raw attributes was the easiest way to compete with such people. Of course, that was if they could learn to control such speeds. Just fleeing in a straight line was one thing, but Seth wasn't quite the kind of active person. Even with the assistance of skills like 3D maneuver assistance, it was simply not his preferred fighting style. But a quick escape was in tune with his other skills. A caster had to keep his distance. He couldn't help but imagine the time when he really got into a serious fight with people. With his speed and firepower, he would seem like a glass cannon. Only to turn out to be tough as a nail, even if they can force him into melee combat. He also liked the protection of Apollo in this regard. With immunity to light attribute damage, he was now invulnerable to 2 elements, fire and light. His resistance to earth attribute damage also couldn't be ignored. And aside from his elemental resistance, he had a high magic resistance thanks to his soul armaments. The armor gave him immunity to weapon damage and negated 80% of any other damage. This meant magic was the greatest enemy with just the armor, but with Seth's other stats, there were only 2 elements that could really harm him, and those would still face his magic resistance and the negation effect. Despite not having any personal skills or spells with the light attribute, it tied in with the power of Antares itself. Harrowing light, blinding light, and scorching light did exactly what they sounded like. Harrowing light was mostly based on his demonic etchings but seemed to have been influenced by the power of the Olympian deities. Like blinding light and scorching light, it could be used at command, instead of being a passive effect that only worked with reflected light. Blinding light seemed to be based on Apollo's power and could blind the enemy based on the difference in power. A weak enemy could even be permanently blinded. Maybe it had been slightly influenced by the demonic power? Since he was learning earth magic, he also appreciated the Descendant of Gaia effects. Its effects were similar to leveling up earth affinity, but it was separate and stacked with the effects of the skill. This made him virtually immune to earth attribute damage when taking the other effects of the armor and his own earth resistance into account. The advantages of demonic nature were obvious, and draconic disposition even gave him back what he thought was lost. But the set skill did not just offer him the same dragon might skill that the wyvern set had given him, no, this one was even better. On top of it, there was dragon roar, which was similar, but different. Dragon might was an aura of psychological intimidation. Dragon roar was a sound attack that could deal physical damage on top of a chance of causing stunts and deafness. They were two very convenient crowd control skills. Their only drawback was the 2-hour cooldown. He had been so enraptured by the finally updated set skill, that he almost missed the 2 additional options on the shield itself. Weapon break improved the chance of breaking an opposing weapon, based on the difference in quality and materials between the shield and the weapon it blocked. Seth's mind could help but imagine him going around and crushing enemy swords by flinging around the small buckler. The other was radiant refraction, which seemed to have been a skill of the crystal turtle. It allowed the use of refraction on light elemental skills. This meant the power of the skill was split, while the possible targets or area effects were increased by the number of splits. It seemed like a weird skill at first glance. Others may have thought of using a strong skill like scorching light and dealing damage to a bigger number of people. However, Seth's mind wandered to something like the harrowing light. If he watered down the power that could make a weak person lose their mind, he might be able to use it on a big number of enemies without dealing permanent damage. With radiant refraction he could turn his phase or his shield on stun. Still, as overpowered as it all sounded, Seth was still unsure whether it alone was enough to compete with what was to come. He had been lucky to stall Nadina back then. Of course, he could have brought out his fire, but he doubted he would have had a way to deal with her undead dragon. Not even Python gave him confidence in that regard. Other powerful chosen wouldn't be weaker than her. Before, the blacksmith doubted he could compete with a chosen specialized in melee combat, even if his items were double or triple as good. That was the kind of existence he saw them as from the information he had. Forgebrand, the dwarf that had founded his very own class, was a totally unreasonable existence as the champion of Hades. Seth inherited just a fraction of his power, and it was enough to help him become a craftsman blacksmith in a mere 2 years. Although he had the favor of 3 gods, none of them had given him their specialties. He had not gotten the full gold finger like other chosen would have. However, this armor was his first step to being able to at least compete on even ground with such beings. Chapter 599. Keeping a Promise. Boom. A figure fell to the ground, leaving a human-shaped indent on the walls of the training room. Jonah could only look on awkwardly, secretly wiping away the sweat. He was just glad that a human-shaped bullet missed him. It was a lot harder to get used to high-speed combat than Seth had expected. This was the 3rd time he had to peel himself out of the wall. His movement skill lame one's walk needed absolute control over one's body. This was why he had to familiarize himself with the sudden increase in agility, so he could use it to its full potential. He had asked for Jonah's help since the vampiric swordsman was agility-based himself, and he had the highest self-healing rate in Mina's March. If Seth were to, theoretically, run him over like a freight train, Jonah had the highest chance to survive until he could cast healing magic on him. The blacksmith wiped some dust off and got back into a fighting stance. Despite the force and speed, Seth suffered almost no injuries from running into a magically reinforced rock wall at full speed. This was possible because the 80% damage nullification applied to literally every incoming damage. It was not just about magic, weapons, or skill. It also counted for impacts, fall damage, pressure, anything that could harm him, was reduced by 80%. The blacksmith was not going to test it, but he hypothesized that he could not die from fall damage anymore. Like an ant that was not heavy enough to develop a terminal velocity that could kill it, with 80% damage reduction in his defensive effects, he could probably survive any fall at this point. As mentioned, he was not crazy enough to test it, but he was quite sure it was possible. After another hour of Seth trying to get used to his increased speed, the blacksmith said farewell to Jonah and returned to the workshop. Even though he had finally finished his armor, there were still some things to do. Before anything else, he wanted to keep the promise he had neglected for a little too long. He still owed a flute to Ember, who had helped him find Tunomol. The demon girl had given him the blueprint, but it was still the first time he was really going to make an instrument. Luckily he had the skill instrument maker, which allowed him to use system guidance. However, he quickly found that it was not needed. The structure of the instrument itself was not overly complicated. With instrument maker at the beginner stage and the experience as a craftsman blacksmith and goldsmith, making the body itself was easier than expected. Seth went as far as doing her a favor and used Ithilden for the body of the flute. The superior material was chosen because of the wondrous design of the enchantments on the flute. They would add magic effects into the tones played with the flute, based on what kind of power the user chose to imbue with their mana. This way they could adjust the tones to the power of the music, gaining synergistic effects. These engravings were similar to elemental enchantments Seth could use to give a weapon elemental attack properties. The ones on the flute had no fixed element, making them more versatile, but also less efficient and harder to control. The Ithilden would help to slightly ease this difficulty. Still, it would take a lot of skill as a musician and a magician to bring out the flute's full potential. On one hand, he questioned whether Ember had what it took to really use this item. Didn't she bite off more than she could chew? On the other hand, if she really managed to become proficient in playing this flute, maybe he should recruit her for Minas Mar in the end? In the beginning, the blacksmith had still been doubtful of her, but she had been a great help during the time he knew her. He put the thoughts of recruiting her in the back of his mind and concentrated on working on engraving the enchantments. Ding! You have finished an epic instrument. Proficiency gained. Ding! Your skill Instrument Maker, Beginner, LV.1 has become Instrument Maker, Apprentice, LV.3. By using an epic material and his already high skills in making the flute, his skill had directly jumped up by a whole tier. This gave Seth a pleasant surprise. He couldn't help but enjoy how easy it was to raise a low-level skill by using high-grade materials. Of course, this was only possible because he already had high crafting skills, which allowed him to work with these kinds of materials. Otherwise, Seth would have chosen this route from the very start. The flute had not taken as long as he expected, and now he had licked blood. There was another instrument that had been dwelling in his inventory for quite a while. Cleobum's panpipes and soul were still waiting to be turned into something. Ember's flute had inspired him to make similar changes to the panpipes. Although it had no valves, he could still adjust the enchantment and add it to the 13 pipes of Cleobum's flute. Although it would take a lot of skill for a musician to play it, not only was Cleobum a skilled individual, but once the pipes were his body, Seth guessed he would have little problems using the enchantments skillfully. Seth still thought that his decision to end Cleobum was right. The satyr was a robber, who used his music and skills in illusions to harm people. It was such a fundamental part of his being, that it was even mentioned in the flavor text of his soul. However, he had also felt a little guilty as there was a difference to end someone to prevent future harm and capturing their soul for one's own profit. This was why he had not used the souls for any of his items so far. He also couldn't trust it. But now, he also had a way to make sure the satyr wouldn't betray him. Hey, Cleobum! Are you interested in making music once again? Seth tried to contact the soul with telepathy, but there was only silence. Cleobum. That is my name. Are you Hades? Thanatos? Hermes? Can I finally go to the afterlife? Please release me from this torturing silence. Seth hesitated. Right, he had not spoken with Cleobum before. How would he know that his soul was captured at the time of his death? He only hesitated for a moment, before he made a decision. No, Cleobum. This is not God. No God will come for you. No, please. I'm willing to repent. I'm sorry for never respecting the divine rules. I'm sorry for all the things I did. Even if I have to suffer in Tartaros, let me leave this darkness and silence, the soul interrupted Seth and begged. He didn't even beg for mercy, but for punishment. I am no God, but if it is a punishment you wish for, I can give it to you and end your life in darkness. Yes, yes. I have reflected. I will take any punishment. Whatever it is. As long as it isn't this silence. Then listen closely. You will be reborn in a body of music and your punishment will be to serve the man who had killed you. Do you agree? Then repeat after me loud and clear. In exchange for a body and the chance to make music once again, I am willing to serve the man who has killed me. Seth Smith. Yes, yes. In exchange for a body and the chance to make music once again, I am willing to serve the man who has killed me. Seth Smith. A stream of power flowed out from the soul after voicing its clear consent, forming a scroll in the blacksmith's hand. This was a soul contract, not one that held souls, but one that could force someone to adhere to an agreement. During the acquisition of materials for the Fair 2.0, Seth had gained quite a bit of proficiency from watching and working with Tunomol. His soul trader skill was also close to reaching Level 4. The contract had been established. Get ready for your reincarnation. With the soul contract in hand, Seth started working on the panpipes. Seth couldn't help feeling some disgust when he checked the panpipes again, using the blacksmith's eyes. Cleobum's instrument, which looked like ivory, was actually made from hollowed human bones. The blacksmith had no problem working with monster bones, but working with human bones made him feel inherently icky. Still, he overcame his feelings and started working on the bones. Unlike with Ember's flute, which he made completely out of Ithilden and only engraved with the enchantment, he got ready to make inlays of Ithilden on the bone panpipes. Wearing a mask against the dust, he cut the channels for the metal into the bones. He made sure to thoroughly clean his workspace and cremated the bone dust later. When he finished the inlays, he forged Cleobum's soul to mirror his panpipes and infused the satyr's soul. Ding! You have created a rare ego instrument. Proficiency gained. Ding! Your skill instrument maker, apprentice, LV.3 has become instrument maker, apprentice, LV.6. Chapter 600. A new chapter. The moment Seth took the flute out from the waters of Styx, it started to play an eerie tune that started to summon the illusion of a dark and misty forest. Stop that, Cleobum! But I am so happy to be free, benefactor. Your tune had truly widened my horizons. If only I had been stronger, I wouldn't have fallen off the edge and died. The floating panpipes kissed up to him. It seemed that the satyr minstrel had quickly made the connection between Seth and the benefactor that gave it a new lease on life. Judging by its fawning attitude, the satyr didn't take the ruse to heart. On another note, that the panpipes were immediately able to cast illusion magic with music showed that the enchantment not only worked, but Cleobum could use the power instinctively. This was a very good result. Ounce, I have to go somewhere. Can you show the newcomer the ropes? He asked the demonic lyre to indoctrinate the new member of their band. It seemed like a pain in the ass, and Seth wanted to go to Delta and deliver Ember her new flute. He had made her wait for quite some time. Sure, I will take care of it, the demon reassured him before he left the workshop. Training in the morning, working in the noon. It was early evening when the blacksmith arrived in Delta. Oh wow, the great tower master really remembered poor little me. Ember greeted him. She was standing in the door of her room at the dorms of the Bard College. Seth had not visited here often, which led to him visiting a few wrong doors before the right demon girl opened. Come on, don't be like that. Waiting roughly a week or two for a custom product made by a sought-after craftsman, it's not that long. Yet, always an excuse ready. Come on in. She finally stepped aside and invited him in. Do you want a cup of tea? She asked after seating him in her living room. No, it's okay. It's already getting a little late. I just wanted to deliver your flute. He brought out a long, narrow box of polished wood from the hanging tree and placed it on the table between them. Ember looked at the box in anticipation as her fingers carefully lifted the lid. Seeing the glint of joy in her eyes and the smile on her lips, Seth felt very satisfied. A craftsman's greatest reward was to see the joy of a satisfied customer. To see one's work truly valued. Candidly, she lifted the shining silver flute from the passing. After her eyes wandered along the instrument, she immediately lifted the flute to her lips. A beautiful melody filled the room. The demon girl performed a playful tune and everything seemed to her satisfaction. Then the music changed, became colder and more cutting. For just a moment, a cold breeze filled the room. Then the tunes immediately stopped. Why did you stop? The blacksmith looked up. He had been listening to her play and not watching her. Seth resisted laughing out loud. Ember was staring at him angrily, her fingers and lips were frozen to the flute. Don't look at me like this. You wanted a flute like this. You will have to learn how to play it correctly. She rolled her eyes and pointed at the door. I should leave? I understand, you probably want to have some alone time with your new baby. I get it. I'm leaving, calm down, he chuckled and got up to leave. He was about to leave when he felt her hand on his shoulder. She had managed to release her lips from the flute. I didn't mean it. Thank you for making it for me, she said with a genuine smile. He reciprocated her smile. I'm glad you like it. It's already late. I'm returning now. The blacksmith really just wanted to deliver the flute and keep his promise for the peace of his mind. Now he could fully concentrate on what was to come. He felt that things were on the right track. The plans for the future were clear. Tomorrow he could set off to take a look at Karina's work, and a few days later they would officially announce the recruitment for the expansion of the trade route. In the meantime, he would be able to work on the FAIR 2.0. Once he had them, he felt more than prepared for the ding. Suddenly a system window opened before his eyes and interrupted his thoughts. Server announcement. Congratulations to all players. Over the past 2 years, you have used the opportunity given to you by the system god. You have struggled, you have grown, you have survived. As of now, Earth has synchronized with the Pathworks and fulfilled the requirements for the next chapter of your journey. The World Quest, Age of Gods is now available. All players who accept it, agree to be watched by the gods in exchange for a chance to become a chosen one and inherit a divine class. Seth faltered when he read the announcement. What was with this timing? He was not ready, yet. He still had so much to do, so much to. He couldn't help but laugh. It was getting dark and he stood in the middle of the campus, laughing to himself at the sight of his greatest worry suddenly coming true. There was so much to worry about and so much to do, and suddenly this world quest had secretly snuck up on him like a thief. It was simply too ridiculous. He had taken his worries as a sign of his precognitive skills, but now he found that with all his hurrying he had not finished in time anyway. What had he even worried about so much? It was different from the morning when the apocalypse happened. His problems didn't suddenly change. Merchants vying for business opportunities. A bunch of criminals framed them a little. A mysterious continent of weird people loomed in the distance. He was afraid of powerful champions, but it wasn't like they would suddenly appear out of nowhere, with incredible powers, and smash everything in their way. The system prompt also made him realize something he had not thought of. Something he had forgotten, yet was very worried about. A much easier solution. Everyone had a chance to become a chosen. This included his friends, the people, and the lords of Minas March. He was sure the chosen ones would lead to a reshuffling of the current power structure, but nothing stopped him from recruiting them or promoting his friends to become chosen ones. The blacksmith realized that he had slightly strayed from the correct path. Originally, Seth had chosen to collect companions because he wanted people he could trust, so he wouldn't have to deal with everything alone. But, ever since he found out how to create golems, he had worked and planned for ways to do everything alone and get his friends out of harm's way. In the end, he had not been able to fully trust their abilities and tried to protect them, out of fear of losing them. Now it finally dawned on him, that he shouldn't create an army to protect them, but try and make them more interesting to gods. The best protection was quite simply to have them be the tyrants of this age. So what if there were chosen people out there? What could they do against chosen ones in relic and legendary armor? Who was going to be their match? Even if they weren't going to be chosen, Seth didn't doubt that there were other benefits that could be gained by the world quest. He had to hurry back and make sure everyone accepted it. It was just a shame, that he wasn't eligible anymore. When he tried to accept the quest, he was notified that he was already chosen by gods and no other gods would be able to spectate him without the consent of his patrons. Although it was a shame, it helped get rid of one of his doubts, which was that gods might be able to spy for their champions. Wearing the full Scorpio set, Seth ran back to the church. The streets were almost empty, with most people standing in a daze, staring at the announcements in front of their faces. He just arrived at the church's doors, when he heard another announcement. Ding! Leaderboards are now online. Players below leave 100 can view the ranking at your local system church or government building. Together with the notification, a window popped up in front of his eyes. You are NR.1 in the overall blacksmith ranking. The proficiency gained by crafting is tripled. Would you like to publicize your name on the leaderboard? You can choose to postpone this action to a later time. Publish/postpone.